They broke him. He broke the whole fucking country. From bridge to throne, this quiet monster ended quirks, ended heroes, and left nothing but willpower standing. Ruthless, unstoppable, the Red God doesn't ask. He takes, and it's beautiful chaos. Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The rain came down on the Tamagawa Bridge like it had a grudge against the concrete, and Izuku Midoriya stood on the wrong side of the railing with his heels hanging over 400 feet of black water. His fingers had gone white on the steel behind him. His school shoes were full of rain. Below, the river moved slow and heavy, swollen from 3 days of storms, catching the orange of the streetlights and breaking it into pieces. Wind came off the water and pushed at his back like a hand. He was 15 years old, and he had already done the math on his own life. Quirkless. The doctor had set it at 4 with 2 fingers on an x-ray and a sigh he did not bother to hide. Extra joint in the pinky toe. 1 in every 5 people born these days, and Izuku was one of the 4 out of 5 who never got a gift for it. His mother had cried in the car. She had held his hand and said sorry over and over, like an apology was a kind of medicine. 6 months later, she met Toshinori Yagi. The whole country called him All Might, the symbol of peace. Izuku's mother married him under a garden of white flowers, and for about a year, Izuku believed something had been fixed. Toshinori used to sit on the floor of his room with him and look through the analysis notebooks. He used to say, "Good eye, young man," in that big warm voice, and Izuku would go to bed with his chest full of light. Then Izumi was born, half-sister. His mother's hair, Toshinori's jaw, and a quirk that came in at 3 years old when she got angry about a juice box and every plate in the kitchen lifted off the table at once. Telekinesis, raw, wide range, absurd for a toddler. Specialists came to the house. Then agencies, then a private tutor from the Hero Public Safety Commission, and a training room built where the guest bedroom used to be. The notebooks stopped getting looked at. It happened slow enough that nobody could be blamed for it. Toshinori's schedule filled. His mother's attention narrowed to a single point of light with Izumi's name on it. There were still dinners and birthdays and photographs. In every photograph, Izuku stood a half step outside the frame's center. And one year he noticed that on the mantle there were 9 pictures of his sister and one of him, and the one of him was from before Izumi was born. Izumi learned early what the house treated as valuable. By 9, she was flicking him into walls with a thought when he annoyed her. By 11, she had picked up the word that everybody at school used and made it sound almost affectionate. His mother told her to be nicer. Toshinori told her hero conduct starts at home. Nobody took anything away from her. Nobody grounded her. The lesson went in clean, and it went in deep enough to stay. Katsuki Bakugo was worse, because Bakugo enjoyed it. They had been friends once at 4 years old before the diagnosis. Then the explosions came in, and Bakugo understood the world's ranking system before he could tie his own shoes. 11 years of it. Burned notebooks. Burned hands. Kicks in the corridor. Held under the water fountain until his lungs screamed. Teachers who wrote "boys will be boys" on incident forms and filed them where nobody would ever read them, because the boy with the flashy quirk was going to be somebody, and the boy without one was already nobody. In 3rd year, Bakugo threw his analysis notebook out a window into a koi pond and told him, laughing, that if he wanted Urquhart in his next life, he should take a swan dive off the roof. Izuku had gone home and cried in the shower where the sound would be covered, which was a skill he had developed the way other kids developed backhands. And then there was Ochako. That was the part that had gotten him over the railing. She had transferred into Aldera in 2nd year. Round face, brown bob, a laugh that came out too loud for the room and made her cover her mouth every time. She sat next to him because it was the empty seat, and then she kept sitting next to him after other seats opened up, which was the single most confusing thing that had ever happened to him. She asked him questions. She listened to the answers. When he talked about quirk analysis, she leaned in instead of leaning away. She ate lunch on the roof with him for a year and a half, and she told him about her parents' construction company and the money they owed and the way she wanted to be a hero so she could buy them a house. He told her he wanted to be a hero so that somebody like him would exist in the world as proof it was possible. She never laughed at that. Once she put her hand over his on the concrete and said, "You're going to be the coolest one, I already know." Izuku had spent 18 months believing one person on the planet saw him. 3 weeks before the bridge, he had bought a keychain, a cheap plastic one from a claw machine, a little round moon with a face on it because she liked space. He had it in his pocket with a note he had rewritten 11 times. He went looking for her behind the school building on a Thursday when the sky opened up. She was under the awning by the equipment shed with her hands in Katsuki Bakugo's hair and her mouth on his. Izuku's body stopped working. All of it. Lungs, knees, the whole system. Bakugo saw him first. He did not even have the decency to be embarrassed. He pulled back with that grin and wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and said, "Oh, right on time." Ochako turned around and her face did something Izuku would remember for the rest of his life, which was that it went guilty for exactly 1 second and then went defensive. "Izuku, he's been carrying your bag for a year and a half," Bakugo said. "Tell him. Go on, tell him what he's for." She looked at the ground. "Homework," Bakugo said, counting on his fingers. "Notes. And a shot at meeting a real hero, because who's his old man again, who lives in his house?" He laughed. "You thought she liked you? She's aiming for you, idiot. You think she's going to hang a rock around her neck?" "That's..." Ochako's voice cracked. "That's mean, Katsuki. Stop it. Then say it isn't true." The rain filled up the silence. Izuku heard himself ask, "Is it true?" And Ochako Uraraka, who had put her hand over his on the roof, looked at a point somewhere past his shoulder and said, "You're too fragile, Izuku. I need someone who's going somewhere." That was all. That was the whole verdict, delivered in the kind of gentle voice people use when they think being gentle makes it kinder. Bakugo lit a spark off his palm and held it up in front of Izuku's face and said, "Take the hint. Extra." Izuku walked. He did not run, and he did not cry, and he walked for 2 hours through a city that did not look up. And somewhere along the way, the plastic moon keychain went out of his pocket and into a gutter, and he never noticed. At 11:40 p.m., he was on the outside of the Tamagawa Bridge railing with the wind pushing him and the rain coming down, and a number in his head that would not stop repeating, 11 years, and the total quantity of people who would be genuinely worse off tomorrow was 0. He thought about his mother. She would cry. She would cry hard, and then Izumi would have a tournament, and life would close over the space where he had been, like water over a dropped stone. He thought with a clarity that frightened him more than the drop did. Nobody ever chose me. He let go of the railing. For a second and a half, there was falling, and the wind screaming past his ears, and the black river coming up, and then something in Izuku Midoriya woke up. It did not feel like a quirk. There was no tingling, no manifestation, none of the 800 descriptions he had written in his notebooks. It felt like a door being torn off a furnace. Every single thing he had swallowed for 11 years. Every laugh in a hallway, every burned page, every night he had spent making himself smaller so the house would run smoother, every second of that awning, and her voice saying "too fragile," all of it compressed at once into one point behind his sternum, and that point ignited. Red light tore out of him. It came off his body in a column that lit the underside of the bridge like a second sunrise. The rain around him turned to steam 6 feet out and never got closer. The river below him flattened into a bowl, a perfect 30-meter crater pressed into the water by the sheer weight coming off his skin. The air made a sound, a low, grinding boom that rolled up the riverbank and set off every car alarm in Setagaya at once. Izuku Midoriya stopped falling. He hung there, 40 feet above the water, arms loose at his sides, wrapped in a burning red aura that scorched away the storm in a sphere around him. Steam roared upward off the river in a wall. Birds came off the trees on both banks in one panicked cloud. Windows in an apartment tower a half-mile away hummed in their frames. 4 kilometers north in a convenience store, a man's hair stood up on his arms, and he said out loud to nobody, "What the hell was that?" And inside the light, something finished happening. The grief did not go anywhere. It compressed. It packed itself down under enormous pressure until it stopped being pain and became something else, dense, quiet, permanent. A stone behind his ribs. A fact. His eyes changed. The green faded out of them the way color leaves a photograph left in a window, and what was left was a flat, level gray that did not blink at the rain. He lifted his head. 200 feet of bridge, empty, lit orange. Izuku Midoriya spoke his first words as a new thing in the world, and his voice came out low and even, with none of the stammer he had carried since he was 6. Trust begets nothing. Then he turned his face to the clouds and went up. The red light climbed and vanished. The steam kept rising off the river for 11 minutes. The first patrol car got there at 12:04 a.m. What the officers found was a section of bridge deck melted into a shallow bowl of glassy asphalt, a stretch of railing scorched black and warped outward, and one school shoe soaked through, sitting neatly upright on the walkway. They dragged the river for 6 days. The story the world told itself wrote itself, because it was the easy story. Troubled, quirkless boy. Bullied. A bridge in the rain. A shoe. There was even a suicide note that was never actually a note, a page from a school exercise book found in his desk with her. "I want to be someone who saves people" written on it 11 times in careful handwriting, which the news read out loud in a solemn voice for exactly one evening. At the memorial, Izuku Midoriya held her husband's arm and could not stand up straight. Toshinori Yagi wore black and could not speak, and when he tried to say something about the boy he had married into a family with, the words came apart in his mouth in front of 40 people. Izumi cried at the service and stopped crying by dinner. Katsuki Bakugo did not attend. He told his mother he had training. Ochako Uraraka went to the bridge alone 3 days after and sat on the walkway next to a bowl of melted road with her arms around her knees for an hour, and then went home and got into UA, high school. And 8,000 meters up, above the weather, a boy sat cross-legged on nothing with his eyes closed and the storm turning slowly underneath him, and he began to learn what he had become. 5 years went by. They were not empty years. They were the most brutally full years any human being has ever spent alone. Izuku found out fast that the fire in him answered to 2 things, and 2 things only: how hard he pushed and how completely he refused to stop. It was not genetic. There was nothing in his blood that produced it. It came out of the place where a person decides they are going to keep existing, and it grew in exact proportion to the amount of will he fed into it. So he fed it everything. He lived in the Tsukuba Highlands for the first 8 months, in a cave that he widened himself, and he sat in the snow until sitting in the snow stopped being a hardship. He learned to hold the energy inside his skin instead of letting it burn out of him, which took a year, because holding it in hurt worse than letting it go. He learned to move air with it, then to move himself with it, then to move faster than sound, which cost him 3 cracked ribs and a mountainside. By year 2, he could stand in a river current and hold a stone still in the air 10 meters away without touching it. By year 3, the aura had gone from red-orange flame to something else, a deep, heavy crimson that looked less like fire and more like the surface of a star that had been folded down and stuffed into the shape of a young man. When he let even a tenth of it off his shoulders, the ground under his feet developed hairline cracks, and the temperature climbed 9 degrees. By year 4, he had stopped counting what he could do because the question had changed. It was never, how strong am I? It was, is there a limit? And every time he went looking for one, he found more room. His body grew into it. The scrawny kid who used to get shoved into lockers filled out into a frame like a loading dock. Broad through the shoulders, thick through the arms, a build that made expensive coats sit badly on him. He kept his hair short, he kept his mouth shut, the green stayed out of his eyes and never came back. And in the middle of year 2, he came down out of the mountains and found the others. There were a lot of them. That was the thing nobody in a hero costume ever seemed to notice. 20% of the country had no quirk at all, and a slice of the ones who did had drawn the kind that made people cross the street. 6 eyes, a beak, a body that came out looking like the wrong animal. A whole population sitting in the gaps of a society that had built its entire ladder out of a single question, asked at 4 years old with 2 fingers on an X-ray. The first one was a girl named Mika Toyota, 16, Quirkless, who was being shaken down for her wages outside a noodle shop in Chiba by 3 men with tattoos and a lizardhead named Rikuto Ozaki, who clearly hated his own job. Izuku broke every bone in the 3 men's hands without moving from where he stood, which took him roughly a quarter of a second, and which he did while looking at the wall. Rikuto put down his club. "You're a heteromorph," Izuku said. "Yeah. How many jobs did you apply for before this one?" Rikuto's jaw worked. 61. "How many called back?" Silence in the rain outside a noodle shop. "Come with me," Izuku said. "I will teach you something they cannot take." That was how it started. 1 lizard-headed debt collector and 1 16-year-old with a black eye. 5 years later, there were 900 of them. They called the place the Deep, and it was 3 levels of decommissioned subway tunnels and a bomb shelter complex under the western edge of Yokohama. Retrofitted with money, Izuku took off the people he dismantled. There were dormitories, a kitchen that ran 20 hours a day, a medical wing run by a quirkless surgeon named Sen Ashizu, who had been passed over for chief of department 11 years running in favor of men with healing factors, and had spent the last decade drinking about it. A training hall with a floor of poured stone 8 feet thick, which they had to report twice. And every morning at 4, in that hall, 400 people stood in rows in the dark and learned how to find the thing behind their own ribs. Most of them never got far. That was fine. Even the ones who never learned to put light on their hands came out of 8 months in that hall able to break a man's jaw with a straight punch and stand in a storm without flinching, because the training was the training whether the fire came or not. About 1 in 15 learned to push. 1 in 50 learned to fly. Rikuto Ozaki could put his fist through an engine block by the end of year 3, and he cried like a child the first time he did it, and nobody in that hall made a single sound about it. They did not call Izuku sir or master or boss, because he told them the first week that the day they needed a title to obey him was the day the whole thing had already rotted. They called him Midoriya. Most of them, when he was out of the room, called him something else, which had come up out of the criminal underworld and traveled sideways into the deep and stuck, the Red God. That name showed up in a Hero Public Safety Commission threat assessment for the first time in February of the 4th year. And the reason it showed up was that somebody had gone through the Japanese underworld like a hand through a spider web. The meta-liberation splinter cells in Osaka finished in 1 night. Their armory in a crater. Their leadership sitting in a parking garage with every bone intact and every account emptied, unable to explain to police what had happened to them beyond the words "he looked at us." The Kansai trafficking route through Kobe, gone in a week. 41 girls walked out of a container yard wrapped in the coats of 900 strangers, 11 Yakuza branches, a weapons pipeline out of Nagoya, a quirk doping lab under a hospital in Sendai that had been buying children. He left almost all of them alive. That was the part that terrified the professionals more than a body count would have. Bodies were a language heroes understood. This was something else. An entire criminal ecosystem being disassembled by something that took their operations, their money, their leverage, their kneecaps, and their belief in themselves, and left them breathing in the wreckage to explain it to each other. The Commission ran the numbers and reached the only conclusion an institution like the Commission ever reaches. Something powerful existed outside its permission structure. That made it a problem, and their problems got solved by one person. Kaina Tsutsumi took the file at 6 a.m. in a room with no windows, read it in 9 minutes, and asked one question. "Kill order?" "Elimination," the man across the table said, "with a preference for total. This one owns tunnels and true believers. Decapitate it, and the rest scatters." Lady Nagant was 31 years old, and she had been doing this since she was 17. Officially, she was a retired ranked hero who did consulting work. Actually, she was the longest-serving executioner the Hero Public Safety Commission had ever fielded, and she had a private count in the back of her head that she never wrote down anywhere. Not all of them had been villains. Some of them had been journalists. One of them had been a hero who found the wrong filing cabinet she had stopped asking about 10 years ago, which is a thing that happens to a person. She set up on a water tower 2,200 meters from a container yard in Yokohama in the hour before dawn, in a wind of about 4 knots off the bay. Her quirk turned her hair into rifling and her forearm into a barrel, and it grew the round as well, which meant she never had to worry about supply. Armor piercing. 2 centimeters of steel plate at this distance without complaining. Through the scope, the target came into view at 5:14 a.m., walking across an empty lot in a black coat with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. A kid. 20 at the outside, built like a freight elevator. She centered on the base of his skull and thought, the way she always did, this one probably deserves it, and pulled. 2,200 meters is a bit over 2 seconds of flight time. At 1.5 seconds, Izuku Midoriya turned his head. He did not raise a hand. He did not move his feet. He looked back over his shoulder, up and out across 2 kilometers of rooftops and dockside cranes, and his gray eyes found her scope like the distance was a formality. The bullet stopped 1 inch from his eye. Nagant watched through 12 times magnification as her round, a Spitzer of hardened steel moving at 1,100 meters a second, hung in the air in front of that eye, quivering, and then folded in on itself and came apart into dust that the wind took away. She had time for one clear thought, and the thought was, oh. Then he was on the water tower. There was no approach. There was the empty catwalk, and then there was 200 pounds of young man standing 4 feet from her, and the air around him was so hot her scope fogged, and the metal grating under his boots had gone soft and taken the shape of his soles. Nagant's body did the only thing left to it, which was to lock up completely. She could not breathe. It was not fear exactly, it was pressure, a physical weight on her chest and throat like standing too close to a running jet engine, and her lungs simply declined to work in it. "You are Kaina Tsutsumi," he said. She got a word out. "Yeah. 11 years on their payroll." His voice had no anger in it, which was worse. 58 sanctioned kills. 22 of them were people who found paperwork. Her hand had drifted toward her arm. She stopped it because she had just watched what happened to her bullets, and she had a working brain. "You know a lot about me. You are the only interesting thing they own," Izuku said. The wind came across the tower and went around him instead of through him. "They will discard you," he continued. "You have known that for years. When you are inconvenient, they will put you in Tartarus and print a statement about a hero who lost her way, and the men who signed your orders will keep their offices and their pensions and their children's tuition." He let that sit. "You've been carrying their sins in your own hands so that their hands stay clean." Nagant's jaw tightened. "I've heard sermons before, kid. This is no sermon." He turned his head slightly toward the city coming up gray out of the dark. "I am telling you a fact you already know, out loud, which is a thing nobody has ever done in front of you." And that was the part that took the legs out from under her, because she had run this scene in her head. Every mark says something. They beg, they bargain, they get righteous, they cry, they call her a monster, and every one of those she had a groove worn for. She had a groove for all of it. Nobody had ever just said the true thing and then stood there without wanting anything. She thought about a 19-year-old girl in a commission dorm being told that a hero named Ice had gone rogue and finding out 4 years later that Ice had gone rogue by filing a report. She thought about the taste of that. She thought about how she had gotten so good at not thinking about it that the not thinking had become a full-time job, and how tired she was in a way that sleep had stopped touching around her 24th birthday. "They gave you a kill order," Izuku said. "You will report a miss. They will send you again. That is what your life is." He put out his hand. It was scarred across the knuckles, and it was steaming faintly in the cold, and it was the strangest offer anyone had ever made to Kaina Tsutsumi, because there were no terms attached to it. "What is it you want?" she said. "From me," Your eyes, Izuku said, and your honesty. I have 900 people who can hit. I have nobody who can see. And if I say no, then you go home, he said, and I will make sure the men who sent you understand that you had no part in what happens to them. Kaina Tsutsumi stood on a water tower in Yokohama at 5:17 in the morning and understood that this was the first time in her adult life anyone offered her a door instead of a corridor. She took his hand. The heat should have burned her. It did not. Up close, it was like the side of a stove you have your back to in winter. For the record, she said, you're extremely hard to look at. That is a common report. The partnership took 10 months to become the other thing, and it took that long because both of them were built out of the same material, which was the kind of person who assumes any warm thing offered to them is a trap with better bait. She was, first, the best asset the Deep had ever had. She could read a commission internal memo and tell you what the author had eaten for lunch. She built out a spotter network of 11 quirkless kids in Tokyo who did nothing but photograph license plates. She sat in on Izuku's planning sessions with her boots on the table and shot every one of his ideas in the head with a kind of pleasure. You want to walk into the Nagoya pipeline through the front. Yes. Because you can. Yes. That's not a plan, Midoriya. That's a weather event with a schedule. She flicked a photograph across the table. There's a hostage floor. You go through the front, half the guards run downstairs and start shooting insurance policies. So the weather event happens at the back, and I remove the insurance policies from 2 blocks away, and everybody upstairs still gets to have their bad night. Izuku looked at the photograph for a while. Do it your way, he said. Nagant blinked. Just like that? You are correct. Most powerful man on the planet, she said, and you just say you are correct. When you are correct, yes. She had to go for a walk after that one. She learned the way he ran the Deep, and it kept surprising her. He was there every morning at 4. He corrected stances. He remembered the names of 900 people, and he remembered which ones had a sick parent. He sat on the floor of the training hall for 2 hours with a 12-year-old heteromorph girl with a hummingbird's face who could not stop crying and said maybe 11 words the entire time, and she came out of it able to breathe. He also came back from the Sendai lab with his coat soaked through and his hands steady, and told her the number of children in the basement, and then he sat in the dark of the equipment room for 6 hours and did not move. Nagant found him there and sat down on a crate across from him and did not say anything either, and that was the night the shape of it changed. You get to be tired, she said eventually. That is a luxury item. So's a chair. You're sitting on one. Izuku's mouth did something that was about 4% of a smile, and it was the first one she had seen, and she thought about it for a week afterward. She started staying up when he trained. He started coming to find her when he wanted to think out loud, which happened rarely and mattered enormously. She taught him poker, which he was terrible at until he was suddenly unbeatable, at which point she banned him from the table. He taught her to hold a fraction of ki in her palms. She had the will for it in quantities that frightened her when she looked straight at it. And the day she made a candle flame bend from 3 meters away, she laughed so hard she had to sit on the floor. There she is, Izuku said. Shut up. 6 months in on a roof in Kawasaki with a stakeout going nowhere and the sun coming up, she said, You never ask me about the 58. You will tell me when you want to. What if I never want to? Then I will never know, he said. Your past is your property. Kaina Tsutsumi looked at the sunrise for a while. Issei Toshihiro, she said. That was the first one that wasn't a villain. He filed a report about a sanctioned hero who was disappearing homeless heteromorphs in Kyushu, and they told me he'd sold information to the Liberation Army. I put a round through him from 900 meters while he was eating breakfast. He had a paper cup. I remember the cup. Her voice stayed level, which was its own kind of injury. I found out 3 years later, and you know what I did with that? Nothing, Izuku said. Nothing. I went to work the next day. She laughed, and it came out wrong. So you can save the your past is your property stuff, because my property is a landfill. Izuku was silent long enough that she looked over at him. I will tell you a thing I have said to nobody, he said. She waited. The night I woke up, he said, I fell for 1.5 seconds. And in those seconds, I wanted to live. Very badly. More than anything I had wanted in 11 years. He looked out at the city. I had already let go. The wanting arrived too late to be useful. It arrived anyway. And that is what strength is, he said. It is the wanting arriving too late and then refusing to be too late. He turned the gray eyes on her. Ise Toshihiro is finished. Your wanting to have been better arrived late. Refuse to be too late. Nagant sat with that for a while. Then she reached over and took his hand off his knee and held it, which was, given the temperature involved, a considerable statement of intent. You're a very strange man, she said, yes. I'm going to kiss you now, and you're going to be extremely bad at it, and I want you to know I've made peace with that. He was extremely bad at it. It was, they both agreed later, the best thing that had happened to either of them in about 20 years. It was never soft, what they had. Both of them had been made out of hard material by people who owed them apologies. There were nights she woke up with her arm halfway transformed and pointed at the ceiling, and he was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the door. There were arguments that went to genuine anger because she told him the truth about himself, which almost nobody on Earth was equipped to do. She told him once that he had built 900 people a home so he would never have to admit he wanted one, and he did not speak to her for 2 days. And when he came back, he said, "You were correct," and that was the entire apology, and it was enough. They were two people who had stopped believing in the world above them and who had found, at the bottom of it, exactly one other person worth trusting, which is a dark romance. But it is a romance. In the 11th month, Nagant walked into the planning room with a tablet and a look on her face that Izuku had learned to read. UA Sports Festival, she said. 3 weeks out. Full national broadcast. Roughly 40 million domestic viewers. I know what it is. Then you know who's on the poster. She turned the tablet around. 2 students in first-year gym uniforms shot from below in that heroic angle the marketing department loved. On the left, Katsuki Bakugo, 20 pounds heavier than the boy behind the equipment shed, with the same grin. On the right, a girl with dark green hair pulled back tight and her stepfather's jaw. The banner text read, Izumi Yagi, the next symbol? Izuku looked at it for a long moment. There's more, Nagant said, and her voice went careful in the way it did when she was handling something live. I got into the commission's sealed archive, their medical liaison files. She scrolled. Toshinori Yagi. Full injury workup, 5 years of it. He's running on about a fifth of a body. Also, and this is the one, Midoriya, there's an audio asset, logged as reputational containment, Yagi household, dated 6 days after you went off that bridge. The temperature in the room went up. The lights buzzed. Play it, Izuku said. She played it. It was a kitchen. There were dishes in a sink. Inko Midoriya's voice, thick and ruined. They're going to ask why. The reporters are going to ask why, Toshinori, and if anybody at that school talks about Bakugo, about Izumi, they will make it about the family. Toshinori's voice hollowed out, exhausted. They'll make it about me, about whether the symbol of peace could see what was in front of him. A long pause, a chair moving, Inko in a whisper. Then we say he was struggling, privately, that we were getting him help. Inko. Izumi is 13 years old. If they hang this on her, her whole life is over before it starts. She'll never be a hero. She'll be the girl who... Her voice broke and came back harder. He's gone. He's gone and she's still here. 9 seconds of nothing but a tap dripping. Then Toshinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, said, All right, we say he was struggling. The recording ended. The steel table under Izuku's palms had 2 handprints pressed into it, 4 millimeters deep, glowing dull orange at the edges. Nagant did not touch him. She stood where she was. Say something, she said. Izuku straightened up. His face carried nothing at all. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly level, and every hair on her arm stood up. 3 weeks, he said. Get me the broadcast. The UA Sports Festival opened under a hot, cloudless sky with 61,000 people in the seats and a stadium sound system pushing Present Mike's voice into the upper atmosphere. They had changed the format that year. The commission had wanted more television out of it. So the old obstacle race and cavalry battle were gone, replaced with 3 rounds designed by a committee that had clearly watched a lot of game shows. Round 1 was the gauntlet. A 2-kilometer vertical course up the outside of a purpose-built tower with pursuit drones and no rules except reach the top. Katsuki Bakugo came in first by a margin that made the crowd stand up, blasting up the outer wall in a diagonal line and taking 2 of Class 1B off the tower on his way past. Izumi Yagi came in second, riding a slab of her own broken-off concrete like a surfboard with her hands out, hair whipping, laughing. Round 2 was Siege. 12 4-person teams, 1 team defending a marked platform, everyone else attacking, 30 minutes on the clock. Izumi's squad held the platform for the full half hour, mostly because Izumi stood at the front edge of it and folded incoming students out of the air by the fistful. Bakugo's squad took the platform in the second heat in under 4 minutes. Because Bakugo does not defend anything ever, the crowd got exactly the finale it had been promised. 16-name bracket, single elimination, and the 2 names everybody had already circled on opposite sides of it. "We are headed for it, ladies and gentlemen," Present Mix screamed, the match this entire country has been waiting for since the entrance exam. In the stands, in the reserved section behind glass, Toshinori Yagi sat in a gray suit with his hands folded and watched his daughter walk out onto the field. And he was proud, and under the pride there was the thing that lived under everything now, which was a low continuous ache with a boy's name on it. Inko sat beside him with a program folded in her lap. 4 rows down, Ochako Uraraka, Class 1A, eliminated in the gauntlet's third checkpoint. Arm in a sling, leaned forward on the railing and watched Bakugo stretch his shoulders out on the field with a look on her face that was pure open want. She was 19 and popular and on the fast track, and she had a boyfriend the whole country knew the name of, and she had spent 5 years never once saying a certain name out loud. At 2:47 p.m., every screen in the stadium went black. Present Mike said, "Okay, technical difficulty, no big deal. We've got..." The screens came back. They were showing a Hero Public Safety Commission document header, then another, then a scroll, 900 pages of it, fast enough to read the highlights, slow enough that the whole stadium got the shape of it. Sanction orders with names blacked out and dates left in, internal memos about narrative management, a 5-year budget line labeled Asset KT, external resolution. The stadium sound went strange. 61,000 people making the same confused noise. In the commentator's box, Aizawa's head came up off his hand. "Cut the feed. I'm trying. Cut it. Somebody's inside the whole system, Aizawa. I can't..." The screens changed again. Toshinori Yagi, medical workup. Commission eyes only. A full-body scan came up 40 feet tall on the Jumbotron, the cavity where a stomach and most of a respiratory system used to be. 61,000 people looked at the inside of All Might. Toshinori Yagi went the color of paper. Down on the field, Izumi turned around in a slow circle, staring up at the screens. "What is this, Dad?" And then the audio came on through every speaker in the stadium at a volume that made the seats hum. Dishes. A dripping tap. If anybody at that school talks about Bakugo, about Izumi, Bakugo's head snapped up. They will make it about the family. Ochako Uraraka's hands came off the railing. Then we say he was struggling, privately, that we were getting him help. Inko. Izumi is 13 years old. If they hang this on her, her whole life is over before it starts. He's gone. He's gone and she's still here. 9 seconds of a dripping tap played to 61,000 people and 40 million households. All right. We say he was struggling. Then silence and the words on every screen in the stadium, white on black. Izuku Midoriya, 15. They said he jumped. They never said why. The noise the crowd made was not a noise anyone in that stadium had heard before. It came up in a wave, thousands of voices at once, and it was made out of horror and confusion and the specific animal excitement of people watching something enormous break in public. Inko Midoriya had both hands over her mouth. Toshinori was on his feet without knowing he had stood. In the stands, Ochako Uraraka said, out loud, "Izuku?" And then the sky went wrong. It happened over about 4 seconds. The blue above the open roof of the stadium darkened, then warmed, then went the deep red-orange of the inside of a kiln, and a wind came down into the bowl of the arena that was hot enough to make the flag stand straight out. 61,000 people stopped screaming at the same time. Present Mike's voice came through the speakers, small and unprofessional. "What is that?" Something was coming down. It came down slow, which was the terrible part. It could have come down fast. It descended through the red air over the arena like a man taking stairs he owned, wrapped in a column of crimson light that turned the stadium's shadows the wrong direction. And the closer it got, the more the building started to complain. A low, continuous groan out of the support structure, dust shaking loose off the upper tiers, the Jumbotron's frame ticking as the metal expanded. The temperature on the field climbed 11 degrees in 9 seconds. Izumi Yagi held her ground in the center of the field with her hair blowing straight back and her arms up against the heat. And she was the only person in the entire stadium still standing where she had been standing. Izuku Midoriya landed 40 feet from her. The concrete did not crack under his feet. It cracked in a ring 6 meters out, all the way around him, in a single instant like the ground had flinched. A pressure wave went outward and rolled up through the seats. Hats gone, popcorn gone. 61,000 people pushed back into their chairs by nothing at all. He stood up out of the crouch. Black coat, black shirt, gray eyes. 200 pounds of a man who had grown up somewhere else. The aura came off him in slow, heavy waves, and where it touched the field, the paint on the boundary lines bubbled. The stadium had gone so quiet you could hear the flags. In the reserved box, Toshinori Yagi's face had come apart entirely. His mouth was open. He said one word and no sound came out of it. In the stands, 4 rows up, a man in a business suit had his phone out and his hands were shaking so hard the footage would be unusable, and 40 million people were watching on the national feed regardless. Izumi's voice came out thin. "Who are you?" Izuku looked at her. It was the first time he had seen his sister in 5 years. She had their mother's face. She had gotten tall. "Step back," he said. "I asked who you." "Izumi." He said it without heat, and she stopped talking because her name in that voice landed like a hand on the sternum. "You were 13. Step back." Izumi Yagi took 1 step back and hated herself for it and did not know why she had done it. Then Katsuki Bakugo came across the field. He was screaming as he came. He had been screaming for 11 seconds. It was mostly incoherent, and the parts that were coherent were denial. No way, that's a fake. That's a goddamn fake. He's dead. He's dead. Because Bakugo had spent 5 years with a thing in the bottom of his chest that he had never once looked at directly, and the thing had a bridge in it, and a rooftop, and his own voice saying, "Take a swan dive," and here it was, standing on a field in front of 61,000 people wearing a coat. "You're dead!" Bakugo roared. "You jumped?" "I didn't." Izuku turned to face him, and Bakugo's next word died in his throat. Up close, it was worse. The air around this thing bent light. It was radiating heat like the open door of a foundry, and its eyes were flat gray, and its face had nothing on it. No rage, no satisfaction, no recognition. Bakugo had built an entire personality out of being the biggest thing in every room he entered, and he was looking at something that did not consider him a room. So he did what he had always done, which was to go bigger. He dropped his right shoulder and clamped his left hand around his right forearm, and both gauntlets came off his wrists as the sweat in them lit. The crowd knew this one. This was the finisher, the one he had used to end round 2, the one they put on the highlight reels. Bakugo put every gram of himself into it and unloaded a howitzer impact at point-blank range. The explosion took the top 9 rows of the western stand's front railing off. It went up in a mushroom of white fire 40 meters high that turned the arena into a furnace and washed out every camera in the building for a full 2 seconds. The shockwave threw students in the entry tunnel flat on their backs. Present Mike's microphone blew out. Aizawa was already moving, capture weapon up, running. The fire cleared. Izuku Midoriya was walking. He came out of the smoke with the front of his coat smoking and his eyes exactly where they had been. And he had not stopped, and he had not blinked. And the distance between him and Bakugo was closing at the pace of a man crossing a parking lot. Bakugo's face did something the internet would look at for the next decade. It was not fear at first. It was the total system failure of a person watching their best and biggest and only answer land and mean nothing. He blasted again and again. He put 6 more into that chest at a range of 4 feet, screaming, and the last 2 he threw with his eyes shut. The coat smoked. The man did not slow down. You rely on parlor tricks, Izuku said. Then his hand came up and closed around Katsuki Bakugo's face. He lifted him off the ground by the skull one-handed. Bakugo's legs kicked. His hands came up and clamped on Izuku's wrist and let off 2 more explosions directly into it, point blank. And Izuku's arm did not move a millimeter. Izuku! Toshinori's voice cracking from the box. Izuku, please! Izuku put his other hand against Bakugo's chest, palm flat. A sphere of red light formed there. Small, fist-sized, dense enough that it pulled the air in around itself with a sound like an intake. He fired it into him at contact range. What happened next is the reason a generation of people can tell you exactly where they were on the day of the sports festival. The blast went off against Bakugo's sternum, and the expansion took him off Izuku's hand and across the entire field at a speed no eye in that stadium could track. It went through the southern boundary wall, then through the outer concourse wall behind it, then through a maintenance building outside the stadium grounds. The shockwave rolled back the other way through the arena. The field floor came apart. Not cracked, came apart in a crater 40 meters across that went down through the topsoil, through the drainage layer, through 9 feet of reinforced concrete, down to the bedrock underneath, and the bedrock had a hole in it too. The pressure wave hit the stands and blew out every window on the western face of the building at once. The Jumbotron's frame tore free at 3 or 4 corners and hung sideways, throwing sparks. 61,000 people were flattened into their seats. For 1 full second afterward, there was no sound at all in the UA Sports Festival Stadium. Then it broke, and it broke into screaming. Katsuki Bakugo was found 90 meters outside the stadium in the wreckage of a maintenance shed. He was alive. He was conscious. His spine had gone at the 4th and 5th thoracic vertebrae, both of which had been reduced to bone gravel by a pressure wave that had passed through him from front to back. And the specialists who worked on him for the next 19 hours all wrote the same 3 words in their notes, which were no chance of recovery. He was 19 years old. He would never move his legs again. On the field, in a crater, Izuku Midoriya lowered his hand. Aizawa Shota got to 12 meters from him and stopped, because his quirk was already active and had been active since the smoke cleared, and it was doing nothing because there was nothing there for it to erase. His hair was up, his eyes were red. The man in the crater kept burning. That's... Aizawa's voice was not working properly. That isn't a quirk. It is not. Then he turned and looked up into the stands. Ochako Uraraka was on her feet at the railing, and she was screaming. It was a raw, ugly animal sound with Bakugo's name in it. And then it was words, and the words were no, 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 no. And she was climbing over the barrier with 1 arm in a sling and 2 of her classmates hauling her back by the shirt. Her face was wrecked. Her makeup was down her jaw. She had watched in real time the boy she had discarded destroy the boy she had chosen, and both halves of that were now sitting in her chest at once. She screamed, "Izuku, stop, please!" Izuku Midoriya looked up at her. 40 million people watched his face while he did it, and there was nothing on it. Not hatred. Not vindication. Nothing that suggested the last 5 years contained a single thought about her. He rose off the floor of the crater. 10 meters. 20. He came up level with the front row of the western stand and hung there in the air, and the heat coming off him made the whole section stand up and stumble backward over their own seats. Ochako was 3 meters from him, hanging on the railing, sobbing. "I didn't mean it," she said. "I was 15. I was scared. I looked for you. I went to the bridge. I went every year." Her voice broke. "I loved you." "Your tears are meaningless," Izuku said. She stopped breathing. Sleep. The pulse went out of him. It was not an explosion. There was no fire and no sound worth the name, just a single silent expansion of pressure that rolled outward from his body in a widening ring, and everything it touched went down. Ochako Uraraka's hands came off the railing, and she folded over sideways into the seats. The entire western stand went with her. Then the northern. It moved outward through 61,000 people, like a building losing power floor by floor, section after section, going from screaming to silence in the time it takes to blink, bodies slumping over armrests, over each other, into aisles, and the sound of the stadium dropped in stages until half of it was a still, motionless field of the unconscious. 28,000 people. simultaneously. The other half of the stadium came apart in absolute panic. The exits jammed. Pro heroes in the guest sections were on their feet, screaming into phones and into each other's faces. Endeavor was 50 rows up with fire already sheeting off his shoulders in the sense, for the first time in 20 years, that going down there would accomplish nothing except making a specific and permanent mistake. Hawks was on the roof of the press box with his wings out and a hand pressed to his earpiece, and the thing he was saying into it over and over was, "Don't engage, do not engage, tell them, do not engage." Down on the field, Izumi Yagi stood in the lip of the crater with her arms out and every loose piece of debris in a 50-meter radius floating around her, shaking. "You." She was crying. She did not seem to know it. "You put your hand through Katsuki's chest. You knocked out half the, that's my classmates. Those are kids. What is wrong with you?" Izuku turned in the air and looked down at his sister. "They said he was struggling," he said, Izumi's mouth closed. "For 5 years," Izuku said. "That was the only sentence about me in the world. Your mother wrote it. Your father agreed to it. 60,000 people heard it today for the first time." His voice never rose. "Nobody in this stadium has any standing to ask what is wrong with me." "Then what do you want?" "Nothing you have." And then Toshinori Yagi came out onto the field. He came out of the tunnel at a run in a gray suit, and he was not All Might. He was a very tall, thin, sick man with sunken eyes running across a broken field toward a crater, and the entire country watched him do it. "Izuku." He got to the edge of the hole and stopped and put a hand out. "Izuku, my boy, please, please, look at me." Izuku looked at him. Whatever Toshinori had been going to say went out of him. There's a particular thing that happens to a man when he looks into the eyes of a child he failed and finds a stranger there, and it happened on live television in high definition, and it took 11 seconds. "I didn't know," Toshinori said. His voice was in pieces. "I swear to you, I did not know how bad if you had told me." "I told you," Izuku said. Silence. "I was 9 years old," Izuku said. "I came to you with burns on my forearm and I told you what he did, and you said that boys who are frightened of themselves lash out and that a hero learns to forgive." The aura pulsed once and the grass at the crater's rim went brown in a wave. "So I forgave for 6 more years and then I got to the bridge." Toshinori Yagi went down on his knees on the broken field. "I'm sorry," he said. "I am so sorry. I am so." "Strength is absolute," Izuku said. "Strength forgives all, even the past." He said it like a man reading a law off a wall. "That is the only truth I have found in 20 years, and I found it alone, at the bottom of a river." He turned his face up toward the red sky. "You had strength. You held the highest strength in this country in your 2 hands, and you used it to protect an image. You could have protected one house." He was rising. "You were supposed to be a pillar." Toshinori reached up with one shaking hand. "Izuku." The red light went up through the hole in the sky and was gone, and the wind fell, and the sky over UA High School faded from furnace orange back to a blue that looked obscene. The sports festival ended at 3:02 p.m. The next 48 hours were the loudest in the history of Japanese media. The audio recording had been heard by 40 million people. There was no burying it, no press strategy that touched it. No version of the story in which the symbol of peace and his wife had not sat in a kitchen and agreed on a sentence about a dead 15-year-old. The commission tried anyway, because that is what the commission is. They led with the crimes: 28,000 civilians incapacitated, a student critically injured, a national institution's grounds destroyed. They gave the man a code name and a threat class and a wanted notice, and they put every available hero in the country on rotating alert. It did not take. It could not take, because every household in the country had already seen the same footage, and the footage had 2 parts, and the second part was a man kneeling on the ground. Aldera Junior High was besieged by reporters inside a day. 3 former teachers were suspended by the end of the week for what came out of the incident forms. There were candles on the Tamagawa Bridge, hundreds of them, and then thousands, and then somebody spray painted, "They said he was struggling," on the railing in letters 2 meters high, and the city stopped trying to clean it off. There were also the other candles. Because a 19-year-old with a bright future had his spine turned to sand on live television and whatever anyone thought out of bridge, that had happened too. Ochako Uraraka sat in a hospital corridor in room 4 of the intensive care wing for 11 days without going home, and she was photographed doing it. And the photograph ran everywhere. She was 15 when she said the words. She was 19 when she got the bill. The Quirkless communities of Japan had a different reaction entirely, and it went almost completely unreported for 9 days because nobody in a newsroom was looking in that direction. Applications to the deep went from a trickle to a flood. In the first week after the festival, 4,100 people found their way to the various contact points that the network kept in 11 cities. By the end of the month, it was 11,000. They came off construction sites and out of convenience stores and off the streets. They came with 6 eyes and with beaks and with nothing at all. They came because somebody had walked into the most protected space in the country and stood in the middle of it, and none of them had ever seen a person with no quirk do anything except apologize. Izuku turned most of them away. He kept the ones who could stand still for 2 hours. In the deep, on the 9th day, Nagant found him in the training hall at 4 a.m, sitting alone on the stone floor. 28,000, she said, sitting down beside him. You know what the count is on hospitalizations from that? 9. Trampling, mostly, in the exits. 0 deaths. She let that sit. You dropped half a stadium and you killed nobody. I've read the medical reports. They all just slept 4 to 9 hours, woke up fine. That was the intent. Yeah. She looked at the side of his face. I know it was. Do you know it was? He looked back at her, and something in the flat gray shifted about a millimeter. I will not suffer the mistakes of my past again, he said. But those people did nothing to me. There it is, Nagant said, and put her head on his shoulder, which by now she could do without her hair singeing. The thing about the sports festival was that it made Izuku Midoriya visible, and visibility cuts in every direction. 2 weeks after, a man in a mask made contact through 4 intermediaries and offered a partnership. Nagant traced the contact chain to the Shi Hasaikai. She spent 9 days on it and came back with a folder she put down on the table without saying anything, and Izuku opened it. The first page was a medical intake summary for a child. Kaichisaki called himself Overhaul, and he ran what was left of the old Yakuza out of a compound in Naruhara, and he had a plan to sell quirk-destroying bullets to the entire criminal ecosystem of Japan and become the man who owned the concept of fear. The bullets came from a compound. The compound came from blood. The blood came from a 6-year-old girl named Eri, whose quirk rewound living things to a previous state, and who was structurally a renewable resource if you were willing to take her apart and let her put herself back together. Nagant's file said the procedure had been performed at least 130 times. Izuku read the entire folder without moving. When he reached the end, the steel table had 2 more handprints in it. Tonight, he said. It's a fortress, Midoriya. His quirk restructures the whole building. Every wall is a weapon, and he's got a hostage floor that is one little girl. Then take the roof and the west stair and remove anything with a gun, Izuku said, standing. Nobody goes downstairs. And the front? I am the front. The front door of the Shi Hasaikai compound was a 900-kilogram slab of reinforced oak and steel that had been in the family for 4 generations. It came off its hinges and went 90 feet down the entry hall, through a wall, and into a garden. Izuku Midoriya walked in behind it. The first response wave was 14 men with automatic weapons in the entry hall, and the sound of 14 automatic weapons in a stone corridor is deafening for as long as it lasts, which was 4 seconds. The rounds hit an invisible surface 2 feet in front of the man's chest and came apart into copper mist, and the mist hung in the air and drifted, and Izuku kept walking, and the walking was the worst part. Nobody who survived that hallway ever described the light. They all described the boots. He put 9 of them into the walls with the flat of his hand and did not break a stride. The last 5 put down their guns and ran, and he let them, because he had come for one thing. Kaichisaki met him on the 4th floor, in a room that had been a dojo, wearing a plague mask and gloves and an expression that suggested he had been looking forward to this. The Red God, he said. In my house. I'm honored. He tilted his head. You know, I offered you a partnership. I was told you didn't reply. You take a child apart, Izuku said. I cure a disease. Chisaki's voice went up for the first and last time. Quirks are a sickness, a plague of the blood, and every single generation is worse than the last, and I am the only man in this country willing to hold the knife. Izuku took a step forward. Chisaki put his palm on the floor. The entire building attacked at once. The floorboards came up in a wave of 2-meter spikes, 40 of them, hardened by restructuring into something with the density of tungsten. The walls opened and threw more. The ceiling came down as a column of compressed lumber and steel with a point on the end of it. Chisaki had rigged 4 years of his own compound for exactly this moment, and he brought all 4 years down on one man in a black coat in the space of 6 seconds. Every single piece of it hit the wall. It was not visible. There was no shimmer, no dome, nothing for the cameras that would later be pulled from the wreckage to render. There was simply a boundary 2 feet off Izuku Midoriya's skin. And on the far side of that boundary was hardened tungsten density lumber moving at 90 meters a second. And on the near side of it was a man walking, and where the two met, the spikes turned into powder, not broken. Powder. 40 of them. Then 80, then 200, a continuous roar of disintegration filling the room with a fog of pulverized wood and stone that hung there and glittered. Chisaki kept escalating. He restructured the whole east wall into a hydraulic ram and drove it. He merged the floor and the ceiling into a closing set of jaws. He brought 2 structural columns out of the ground and put them through the space where Izuku's chest was. Izuku walked through the powder. Behind the mask, Kai Chisaki's eyes were doing something that his organization's records would have found impossible to reconcile with the man. His hands had started to shake. He was a person who had built an entire philosophy on the idea that with a good enough quirk and enough nerve, you could hold the shape of the world in your 2 hands, and the shape of the world was walking toward him through his best work, and had never once raised its voice. "What are you?" he screamed. Izuku stopped 4 feet away. "You seek to erase quirks with petty science," he said. "You built a syringe and called it a knife. You are a small man with a small idea, and you needed a child to hold it up." He looked down at him. "I am the Absolute." Chisaki lunged with both hands out to touch him, because touch was all he had ever needed. Izuku flicked his wrist. There was a sound like a whip crack in a closed room. Both of Kai Chisaki's arms came apart from the shoulder down. Not cut. The compressed pressure moved through them and left nothing above the elbow that a surgeon would recognize as human tissue, and what was left of the rest went across the dojo and marked the wall. He hit the floor of his own restructured room and screamed, and he kept screaming, and there was nothing in his life left that he could put a hand on. Izuku stepped over him. He found her in the basement, behind a steel door with a keypad, in a room with white walls and a single mattress and a light that was never turned off. The aura went out. It cut off completely, all at once, and the temperature in the corridor dropped back to something a room should be, and what walked through that steel door was a broad-shouldered young man in a black coat with tired gray eyes and nothing burning anywhere on him. Eri was standing in the middle of the floor. She had white hair to her waist and a horn on the right side of her head and a hospital gown, and she had her arms held out from her body the way you hold out arms that have things wrong with them. She had heard the screaming. She did not run, and she did not cry. She stood there and waited to find out which kind of adult this was, because that was the entire skill she had. Izuku went down on one knee 10 feet away and stayed there. "My name is Izuku," he said, and his voice had changed. It was low and slow, and it belonged to somebody else entirely. "The screaming you heard is Chisaki. He will never touch you again." Eri's mouth moved. Nothing came out. "You can stay where you are," he said. "I will wait." Nagant came down the stairs behind him with her rifle arm already back to a human arm, and she took one look at the room and the white walls and the light, and something happened in her face that Izuku had seen exactly twice in a year and a half. She crouched down next to him and shrugged out of her coat. "Hey," she said, "that gown's rubbish. It's freezing in here. Do you want this? You don't have to." She laid it on the floor between them, sleeves out, like an offering. Nobody's going to make you do anything, ever again. That's a promise from a woman who keeps very few. Eri looked at the coat for a long time. Then she took 2 steps forward and picked it up and held it against her chest, and she said, in a voice like a piece of paper, "It's warm." "Yeah," Nagant said. Her own voice had gone rough. "It's a good coat." Eri looked up at Izuku. "Are you a hero?" Izuku Midoriya considered that question for 4 full seconds, and he gave her a true answer, because she had been lied to 130 times. "I am the one who will make sure nobody ever uses you again." Eri thought about that. "Okay," she said. And then she put her arms up, which is a thing that a 6-year-old does without deciding to, and which had probably not worked for her once in her entire life. Izuku picked her up. He held her the way you hold something that has been broken and reassembled 130 times, and she put her face into his shoulder and gripped a fistful of his coat. And she did not cry then either. She cried 9 days later in the deep at 2 in the morning over a bowl of strawberry ice cream for 2 hours. And Nagant sat on the floor next to her the entire time and told her it was fine and that ice cream did that to people. Eri did well in the deep, which surprised the medical staff and did not surprise Izuku at all. She got a room with a window that was actually a light panel painted like a window. And Riku Toozaki spent a weekend building her a bookshelf with a lizard's careful hands and got so nervous presenting it that he broke one of the shelves. She got a routine. Breakfast at 7, a tutor at 9, the training hall at 4 in the afternoon where 200 people learned to breathe, and she sat on a crate at the front with her feet swinging and watched. She learned that the enormous quiet man who had carried her out of a basement would stop whatever he was doing if she stood near him. All of it. 900 people waiting on a decision, and if Eri appeared in a doorway, the decision waited. The Deep learned very fast that the only reliable way to make Izuku Midoriya laugh was to get Eri to tell him a joke, and that her jokes were terrible, and that he laughed anyway, a low, short sound like a door moving, and that 900 people would stop what they were doing to listen to it. 4 months in, she asked to help. Sen Ashizu had explained it to her in language a 6-year-old could hold, which was that her blood had something in it that could undo quirks, and that Chisaki had taken it out of her by taking her apart, and that there was a way to get it without hurting her, and that it would only happen if she said yes, and it would stop the second she said stop. Eri thought about it for 2 days and said yes. They took blood the way you take blood, with a needle and a chair and a cartoon on a screen. And Eri watched the cartoon and held Nagant's hand and asked afterward if she could have the sticker. What Sen Ashizu built out of it over the following 7 months was the single most significant piece of science produced in the 20th or 21st century. And it was produced in a converted subway tunnel by a quirkless surgeon who had been passed over for promotion 11 times. It was a dispersal compound. It bound to atmospheric water. It crossed skin and lung tissue, and it went looking for one specific structure in one specific human genome, the extra factor, the thing that had shown up in a glowing infant in Chingking 180 years ago and never left, and it unmade it permanently at the root. It did nothing else. It did not harm tissue. It did not touch a heart or a liver or a brain. A person exposed to it would feel a cold, clean absence and would remain, in every other respect, a healthy human being. Ashizu brought Izuku the final workup at 3 in the morning and put it on the table and sat down and put his face in his hands. "It works," he said. "Seeded through cloud cover at scale, with the right pressure system, we cover the whole country in one night. Everybody. Heroes, villains, kids." He looked up. "I need you to say out loud what we're doing, Midoriya. I need to hear it from you, because I have a daughter and she's got a quirk and she's going to lose it, and I need to hear it out loud." Izuku Midoriya sat down across from him. He was silent for a long time. "When I was 4, he said, a man looked at an X-ray of my foot and told me what my life was going to be. He was right." He turned his hands over on the table. "Every door in this country has a lock on it, and the key is in your blood. If you were born with the wrong blood, you can work for 20 years and be excellent and grateful and useful, and it changes nothing because the lock is not on your work, it's on your blood. Flood. So we take away the key. we take away the lock. He looked up. I have spent 5 years teaching people that strength can be built from nothing but will. 900 of them. It is true, and it is slow, and it is available to every human being alive, and nobody would ever choose it while the lottery still exists. The lights in the room buzzed once. The lottery has run for 180 years. It has produced this world. Your daughter will lose a quirk and gain a country where nothing about her is decided on the day she is born. Ashizu was quiet. Strength is absolute, Izuku said. Strength that arrives in the mail is not strength. It is inheritance. I will end the inheritance. Senashizu sat there a while longer. For what it's worth, he said, she's 12 and her quirk lets her change the color of her own eyebrows. Then she loses little. Yeah, Ashizu said and started to laugh, and it turned into something else halfway, and Izuku let him have it. Nagant found him afterward on the surface, on the roof of a warehouse, looking east. Ashizu's crying in the mess hall, she said. I know. So am I a bit on the inside, where it's professional. She leaned on the rail next to him and lit a cigarette she was pretending she still smoked. You know how many people this touches? 126 million. And you're going to do it anyway. Yes. Good, she said. Izuku looked over at her. Don't do that, Nagant said. Don't do the face. I've read those commission files from the inside for 11 years, Midoriya. I have shot people for having paperwork. You know what a quirk actually is? In that building? It's a budget line. It's a resource with a face on it. They looked at a 17-year-old girl who could grow bullets out of her own body, and they didn't see a girl. They saw ammunition that didn't need to be purchased. She flicked ash. So yeah, burn the whole thing to the ground and let's find out what people are like without it. He put out his hand and she took it, and they stood on a warehouse roof and looked at Tokyo. They needed 9 weeks to build the dispersal capacity and get the weather. They got 7 because All for One came out of the ground. He came out in Kamino Ward on a Thursday evening with a purpose, and the purpose was not conquest. He was a very old man in a very good suit with tubes in his face, and he had been waiting 11 years for a specific afternoon. And the afternoon had arrived because Toshinori Yagi was dying in public, and All for One wanted the last of One for All out of him before it went anywhere useful. He leveled 6 blocks in 9 minutes to make sure the invitation was received. He did it without much interest. Buildings came down. The evening news went to the helicopter feed and stayed there. Toshinori Yagi came because he always came. He came as All Might, which he could hold for about 90 seconds now, and the country watched him do it, and the country understood because the country had seen the scan of his insides on a jumbotron 4 months ago. There was also the second thing, which almost nobody knew. 3 weeks after the sports festival, in a bare room at UA with the door locked, Toshinori Yagi had sat across from his daughter and told her the truth about One for All, and about a boy on a bridge, and about a sentence in a kitchen. And then he had passed her the ember, because he had 11 months of life left in him at the outside, and he had learned exactly one lesson in 5 years, which was that the strong should be honest with the people in their house. Azumi Yagi took One for All at 17 with her father's blood on her hands in a bare room, and she did not want it, and she took it anyway. She was 2 kilometers from Kamino when it started, in the back of a support vehicle, screaming at Aizawa to let her out. In Kamino, in the smoke, All for One held Toshinori Yagi off the ground by the throat and made a small, satisfied sound. Look at you, he said. There's almost nothing left. Did you know I've watched every one of your press conferences? The suit's very good. It hides the hollow parts. His hand tightened. Let me have the last of it, Toshinori. You're going to drop it in a hospital bed otherwise, and that would be such a waste of 180 years. All Might's form flickered. She's already got it, he said, and grinned with blood in his teeth. You're late. All for One went still. The girl. You're late, All Might said. The old man's hand came back for a blow that would have finished its stat, and the sky over Kamino Ward turned red. It came down as a line of light. The impact was not a landing. It was an event. 200 pounds of compressed will hit the street between them at a velocity that had no business existing at street level, and the pressure ring went out through 6 blocks of ruins and knocked every standing wall flat in a perfect circle. The helicopter feed lost stabilization and spun. Every car in 3 streets went up on 2 wheels and came down on its roof. All for One let go of all might and was thrown 40 meters. When the dust cleared, there was a crater and Izuku Midoriya standing in it, and the air above him was already glowing. He said nothing at all. He did not introduce himself, and he did not make a speech, and he did not look at his stepfather, who was on his knees 11 meters away, deflated back to a thin man in a torn costume, and saying his name. All for One got up out of the rubble, and then he laughed. "Oh," he said. "Oh, of course, the stepson, the quirkless one." He straightened his ruined jacket. "I watched your little television appearance, 6 times. And do you know what I concluded? That whatever is in you, it is an energy, and every energy that has ever existed can be taken." He spread his arms. "Give it to me, boy. I'll take excellent care of it. I've had 180 years of practice with things that don't belong to me." Then he attacked. And it was, by any measure that had ever been used in that country, the single largest offensive technique ever deployed by a living person. He layered it. 6 compressed air cannons, each one capable of removing a building, stacked into one column and wrapped in a lattice of black tendrils out of rivet stab, threaded with spring-like limbs and a kinetic multiplier, and 2 quirks nobody alive had names for. It came down the street toward Izuku Midoriya like a freight train made out of physics, and it was designed with total confidence to atomize any organism that had ever walked. Izuku's eyes narrowed. That was the whole of it. His hands stayed at his sides. The pressure that came off that look went down the street and met the attack head-on, and the attack ceased to exist. The tendrils came apart into nothing. The 6 stacked air cannons detonated inside their own column, and because they were compressed and layered and stacked, they detonated backward, 100 meters of the old man's own force reversing down the barrel of itself and arriving home all at once. The blowback took All for One's right arm off at the shoulder and put him through the front of a collapsed department store. He screamed. It was a high, thin, disbelieving sound out of a very old throat, and it was the first genuine sound he had made in 80 years. "What?" He came up on one knee with his remaining hand pressed to the socket. That's no quirk. That isn't possible. Nothing in the world." Izuku raised one hand. The sphere formed above his palm. It came together with a low intake of air, and it was the size of a fist, and everything in 6 blocks leaned toward it. "You are nothing but a thief," Izuku said. He fired. The sphere left his hand and expanded, and the front of it hit All for One, and in the back of it was still leaving Izuku's palm, and the width of it filled the street. It went 1,100 meters east through the ruins of Kamino Ward and out over the bay. And when it reached open water, it kept going as a wall of red light and steam that observers in Chiba reported as a sunrise happening in the wrong direction. It left a channel through the city 40 meters wide and 12 meters deep with glass at the bottom of it. There was nothing left of All for One. There was no body. There was a socket in the geometry of the world where a very old man had been, and then there was not. 180 years of accumulated theft ended in about 4/5 of a second, off camera, because the helicopter feed had whited it out. The feed came back. In the middle of a channel of glass, a young man in a smoking coat lowered his hand and turned around. Toshinori Yagi was on his hands and knees in the rubble, and he was crying, and blood was coming out of his mouth in a steady thread and pooling in the dust. "Izuku," he said. The heat began to rise. It came off Izuku Midoriya in slow waves as he walked, and the waves got worse with every step, and the aura went from a red glow to a column, and then the column erupted. His frame seemed to grow inside it, shoulders wider, the air around him bending, the light going from crimson to something with white at the center of it. The asphalt under his boots liquefied and pulled at his soles. The undersides of 6 overturned cars sagged and began to drip. The sky above 6 blocks of Kamino Ward tinted the color of an open kiln, and 8 kilometers away on a rooftop in Shinjuku, a family watching the news put their hands on their chests because they could feel it there. "My boy," Toshinori said. Please, please. He got one leg under himself. I know what I did. I have known it every hour for 5 years, and I would give the rest of my life to have that day in the kitchen back. You have very little of it left to give. Then take it. It came out of him as a roar, the old voice, the one that had held a country together for 30 years, and it was ruined, and it was still enormous. Take it. Take all of it, but stop this. There are children in this city, Izuku. There are people under that rubble right now, and you are still my son. Izuku stopped 4 feet away. The heat at that distance would have killed a man. Toshinori Yagi knelt in it and looked up. You were supposed to be a pillar of peace, Izuku said. I know. You held the greatest strength in the world, and every person in this country slept better because of it. The words came out level and slow, and you could not protect one house, one hallway, one boy who came to you at 9 years old with burns on his arm. Toshinori Yagi's face broke completely. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know. And then Izuku Midoriya drove his fist through his stepfather's chest. It went in below the sternum, wrapped in red light, and One for All rose to meet it in the last instant. A flare of green lightning out of a dying body, the accumulated power of 8 generations coming up as a wall in the space of a millisecond. It was a wall in front of a star. The key went through it. It went through One for All, and it went through the man, and it came out the other side. And the light that came out the back of Toshinori Yagi lit the rubble behind him for 100 meters. Izuku withdrew his hand. All Might went down onto his back in the street. He coughed once, and it brought up more blood than a chest ought to hold. And his eyes were open, and they were fixed on the young man standing over him. And this is what the footage shows, and people have argued about it for years. There was no accusation in them at all. Izuku Midoriya crouched down beside him. He lowered his voice, and what he said was picked up by exactly one microphone in the world, a phone in the hand of a 19-year-old evacuee behind a concrete barrier 90 meters away. And it came out barely audible, and it has been played 4 billion times. Strength forgives all, Izuku said, but I do not forgive you. Toshinori Yagi's mouth moved. He got out 2 words, and the phone caught those as well. Proud of. Then All Might, the symbol of peace, the 8th holder of One for All, died in the street in Kamino Ward at 7:41 on a Thursday evening with his stepson beside him in front of a live national broadcast. The silence that came down over Kamino was total. There were about 400 people within sight of it. Evacuees behind barriers, firefighters, 9 sidekicks from 3 agencies who had been organizing a search line and had stopped moving somewhere around the part where the sky turned red. A woman with a baby in a carrier who had frozen halfway out of a stairwell. Nobody screamed for 11 seconds. That is the part every account agrees on. 400 people watched the most powerful and beloved human being in the history of their country get killed on a public street. And for 11 seconds, the only sound in Kamino Ward was a fire alarm 3 blocks away. Then it broke. A woman started wailing. A firefighter dropped to his knees in the road and put his helmet on the ground. 2 of the sidekicks went for their phones and could not work them. Somebody shouted, "He's dead. All Might's dead. He's..." And the sentence turned into something without words in it. In studios across the country, anchors stopped talking mid-sentence. A veteran newsreader at NHK, a man who had covered 40 years of disasters, put a hand over his mouth on live television and did not remove it for a full minute. Izuku Midoriya stood up in the street. He looked, for the length of one breath, at the body. Then he went up and the red light went with him, and the sky over Kamino Ward stayed the wrong color for 6 hours. 2 kilometers away, Izumi Yagi got out of the support vehicle. Nobody stopped her. Aizawa tried. There was a slab of a collapsed overpass in the way, and it went into the air and then into a wall, and she walked out into a ruined street with green lightning coming off her shoulders in an ugly, unpracticed crackle, and every loose object in 50 meters floating around her. And she got as far as the barricade before her legs stopped working. She sat down in the road in Kamino Ward, and she screamed until she had nothing left, and her mother, watching in a house in Musutafu with the television on, heard the same news at the same moment and went down onto the kitchen floor in the same room where she had once agreed on a sentence. The rain started at midnight. 11 days later. They had the pressure system they needed, a front coming in off the Sea of Japan, wide and slow, covering the entire archipelago in cloud from Hokkaido to Okinawa. 900 people had spent 11 days installing dispersal units in 11 prefectures. The last one went live at 11:52 p.m. It did not look like rain when it came. That is what everyone remembers first. The clouds over Tokyo took on a color around midnight that people photographed from balconies and posted before anyone understood what they were looking at. A deep, warm, arterial red spreading through the overcast from the west, lit from inside. It looked like the sky had been cut. The water came down at 8 minutes past 12. In an izakaya in Shibuya, a man with a flamer quirk was lighting a customer's cigarette off his thumb, and the flame went out and did not come back. He looked at his hand. He kept flicking his thumb over and over, and the sound of him doing it went on for a long time. In a hospital in Nagoya, a healing-type nurse had her hands on a car crash victim's chest, and the warmth under her palms stopped, and she said, "Wait, wait," and the man died in front of her over the following 90 seconds, and she never worked again. In Tartarus, in a cell on the 4th level, a man made out of living cement felt the substance of his own body go inert, and became a person again for the first time in 29 years, and cried about both facts at once. Across Japan, in the space of about 4 hours, 126 million people lost something they had never once had to think about. Pro-heroes were the worst of it, because they had built entire selves on top of it. Endeavor stood in the street outside his agency in the red rain with both hands open at his sides and tried 900 times to produce a flame and produced nothing. And a man who had spent 40 years being the second strongest human being in Japan sat down on a curb in the rain in his costume and looked at his palms like they were somebody else's. Mount Lady sat on the floor of her apartment. Hawks stood on a rooftop in Fukuoka with feathers falling out of his back in handfuls and let them go, and by dawn there was a red drift of them around his boots and a young man in it with an ordinary human spine. The villains lost it at the same time and the same way, which is the part that took the world longest to process. Every organized criminal outfit in the country woke up on the same morning as a group of unarmed people with a lot of enemies. And in Yokohama, in 11 cities, the doors of the deep opened. 940 of them came up into the streets in the dark and gray, and they came up into a country where every single advantage that had ever been used against them had ceased to exist overnight. And they were the only people in Japan who had spent years learning to be strong from nothing. They were not a mob. That was the thing that made the following morning so surreal on television. They moved in blocks of 12. They took police stations and broadcast facilities and commission offices, and they took them almost entirely without killing anyone. Because 100 officers who had relied on quirks for their careers had no answer at all for 4 quirkless people who could break a door in half with their hands and had trained every morning at 4 for 5 years. Rikuto Ozaki took the National Diet Building with 16 people and a crowbar he did not use. Sen Ashizu walked into the hospital that had passed him over 11 times and stood in the lobby and told the staff that the healing wing was closed permanently, and that from this morning forward, medicine in this country would be practiced by people who had studied it. At 4:40 a.m., Izuku Midoriya stood on the roof of the Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters, which was on fire in 3 places, and watched Tokyo in the rain. Nagant stood beside him with her rifle across her shoulder. She had kept it. The arm was ordinary flesh now, and the rifle was a rifle, and she said she liked it better this way because it meant she had to think about the shot. Confirmed on all 11 cities, she said. Coverage is total. Ashizu's models say the compound's still active in the water table for another 8 hours. She wiped rain off her face, and it came off her hand pink. It's done, Midoriya. Whatever it is. Below them, the streets of Tokyo were full of people standing in the rain. That was what the drone footage would show, and it is the footage the history books use. Not fighting, not looting, just thousands and thousands of people out in the red rain at 4 in the morning, in pajamas and work clothes and hero costumes, standing still, looking at their own hands. A man in Ikebukuro who had been able to talk to birds his whole life stood in the middle of an empty intersection and said hello to a pigeon 11 times. A woman in Shinagawa who had spent 30 years with 4 arms and 30 years of being stared at, for it looked down at the 2 she had left and could not decide what she felt and sat down on the wet pavement to work it out. 3 teenagers in Nakano filmed themselves, and the video has 1,100 million views, and the caption is, "We're just people now." And in a house in Musutafu with the lights off, Inko Midoriya stood at the kitchen window with rain running down the glass and understood with total clarity that her son had done this, and that she had helped build the reason. 2 kilometers from UA, the western sky was the color of a furnace. Izumi Yagi stood in the ruined main courtyard of UA High School in her gym uniform in the rain, and she was the only person in that courtyard with anything left. The rain had come for one for all, too. It had gone in, and it had taken what it could. The stockpile, the accumulated quirks, the 7 layers of borrowed power that had been passed down for 180 years. And it had reached the core. And there it had encountered something that had already been passed through 8 human beings and had been part of 180 years of pure will. And the compound and the core had fought each other to a standstill. What was left was an ember, about a fifth of it. Enough green lightning to break a wall, and enough of her own telekinesis and nothing else. Around her in the dark sat 14 members of Class 1A on the wet stone. Ochako Uraraka sat with her back against a broken pillar with her hands open in her lap and looked at them, and she had lost the ability to float a pebble, and she had lost Katsuki Bakugo to a hospital bed in Osaka where he had stopped speaking to visitors, and she had lost a boy on a bridge 5 years ago with a plastic moon keychain in his pocket that she never knew about. She was going to sit in the rain for a long time. Shoto Todoroki stood at the edge of the courtyard with his left hand out and nothing coming off it, and a strange, complicated look on his face that he would spend the next 11 years unpacking. Aizawa Shota stood in a doorway with his eyes ordinary and his capture weapon over his arm, and he watched a 17-year-old girl stand up in the rain. "Izumi," he said. "Sit down." "No. He killed All Might," Aizawa said. "He killed all for one in under a second, and he did it with a look. There is no version of this where you... He's my brother," Izumi said. She turned around, and there was green lightning coming off her, thin and unsteady and refusing to go out. "They put a lie about him on television, and I ate it for 5 years," she said, and her voice was completely level, and she was crying, and both were true. "I used to knock him into walls with my mind because he was easy. I was 9. I was 11. And my dad knew, and my mom knew, and everybody in that house decided I was worth more than he was, and he stood in a stadium and told us so, and every single word of it was true." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "He's right about all of it. That's the part nobody will say out loud. He is right." "Then what are you standing up for?" Izumi Yagi looked west at the red light on the horizon. "Because being right isn't the same as being allowed," she said. "He put his hand through my father's chest, and my father said he was proud of him. So somebody in that family has to go out there and be the one who stands in front of him." Her jaw set. "And there's nobody left but me." 11 kilometers west on the burning roof of the Hero Public Safety Commission, like Izuku Midoriya lifted his head. He felt it come up across the city, a thin, hot, stubborn signal in a world that had just gone silent, small and enormously alive, and it was pointed directly at him. Nagant watched his face. "That her?" "Yes, big. Small," Izuku said, "and it will grow." He looked east toward UA, and the rain went to steam 3 feet from his skin, and his gray eyes carried nothing that resembled fear or hesitation or doubt or any of the other things that had been beaten out of a boy on a bridge 5 years ago. Below him, 126 million people stood in the red rain, holding their empty hands open, learning what they were without the thing they had been handed at birth. Above him, the sky burned. "I have taken the lottery out of the world," Izuku said. "Strength is what remains. Every human being alive now stands where I stood with nothing, and each of them will have to decide the same thing I decided in the air over that river." "And you?" Nagant said. "You've got everything you wanted. What's left for you?" Izuku Midoriya watched the ember burning in the ruins of UA. I seek that which lies beyond strength. The wind came off the burning building and took the smoke sideways, and the red light on the horizon moved. Let her come. The rain kept falling, and it was still red, and it fell on a city that had run out of ways to explain itself. Nagant did not answer. She had learned when an answer was wanted, and this was one of the other times. She looked out over Tokyo instead, over the low churn of it, over the streets where the water ran pink in the gutters, and thousands of people stood out in it in whatever they had been wearing when the world ended, holding their hands open in front of them like men checking for rain in a drought. Below and behind them, the Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters burned in 3 places and did it without hurry. Nobody came to put it out. That was maybe the strangest single detail of the whole night. A government building on fire in the middle of Tokyo, in full view of 11 million people, and the fire brigade did not come because half of the fire brigade had been suppression-type quirk users 4 hours ago, and now they were men in coats with hoses, and the men in coats with hoses were busy pulling people out of a collapsed pedestrian bridge in Shinbashi, where a hardening-type engineer had been holding up a section with his body and had stopped being able to do it at 8 minutes past midnight. And everything in the country had to be redone from the ground. The country did not know that yet in words. It knew it in the way a body knows it is sick before the fever comes. Across the city, in blocks of 12, the deep moved. They came up out of 11 stairwells and 4 service tunnels and a decommissioned pump station in Koto. And they came up in gray. Plain gray coveralls, no insignia, no capes, no colors, nothing on them that photographed well. That was on purpose. Izuku had told them the first year that the day they needed a costume to be brave was the day the whole thing had already rotted. They did not run and they did not shout. They walked in 4s abreast with 3 ranks behind, and at the front of every block was somebody who had memorized a floor plan. They had been drilling these buildings for 2 years. They had drilled them with the lights off. They had drilled them with a man in a black coat standing in the doorway, timing it, and saying nothing except the number when they finished, and then saying the number again the next week, lower, at the Ministry of Internal Affairs Annex in Kasumigaseki. A block of 12 took the north entrance in 40 seconds. There were 9 police officers inside, and 4 of them had drawn service weapons, and 2 of those 4 had already fired at the door before the door came off, and the rounds hit a woman named Haruna Isogai in the shoulder and the hip, and she kept moving, because she had spent 4 years being hit with a steel training bar every morning at 4 by a man who told her that pain is information and nothing more. She put the first officer into a filing cabinet with an open hand. Her block took the other 8 without breaking anything above a wrist, and she sat down against a wall afterward and let a 19-year-old with a medical satchel pack the wounds, and she said through her teeth, "Tell Ashizu I want the good stitches." At the NHK Broadcast Center in Shibuya, a block of 12 came up the loading ramp and stopped at the security desk, and the man at the security desk, 61, 3 years from a pension, an emitter quirk that had let him make a loud sound with his hands and which he had used twice in his life, looked at them and put his palms flat on the counter and said, "Studio 4 is live. Studio 9 has the national uplink. Please don't hurt the kids in the newsroom. They're interns." The block leader, a heteromorph with a hooked beak where a nose should be, said, "Nobody's touching the interns." "Right," the man said. "Right." And then he sat down on his stool and put his hands over his face, and one of the 12 stayed behind with him and got him water. That was the shape of it, over and over, all across the city. It went almost bloodlessly, and the reason it went almost bloodlessly was that in an entire country there was nobody left who was stronger than a trained adult. That fact had been true for 4 hours. It took most people considerably longer than 4 hours to understand what it meant. Rikuto Ozaki took the National Diet Building at 2:19 in the morning with 16 people and a crowbar. He had brought the crowbar because there was a service door on the west side that opened with a crowbar, and he had run the plan 11 times. And 11 times the crowbar had gone into the seam, and 11 times the door had come open. But when he came around the corner in the rain with 16 people behind him and the crowbar hanging from his fist, the west service door was already open, and standing in it was a man in a suit with his tie off and his sleeves rolled and his hands out to the sides. "Are you them?" the man said. "Depends who them is." "The ones from the tunnels." Rikuto's tongue flicked. He was a lizard-headed man, 6'4", and there had been 61 job applications, and he still had the folder of them somewhere in a footlocker because he had never quite been able to throw it out. "Yeah," he said. The man in the suit was a diet staffer named Kenji Waba, 44, and he had had a quirk that let him hold his breath for 11 minutes, which he had never once found a use for in his life. "There are 340 people in this building," Waba said. "Most of them are cleaners and night secretariat. There are 11 members of the House on the 4th floor in an emergency session that has been going in circles for 2 hours because half of them are trying to reach the commission and the commission isn't answering the phone." He wiped rain out of his eyes. "There's a security detail. 12 men. They're all quirkless as of 4 hours ago, like everybody else, and 2 of them have children who go to a school in Chiba, and I would very much like them to go home tonight." Rikuto looked at him for a long time. "You just opened a door for us," he said. "I did." "Why?" Waba laughed, and it came out shaky and awful and honest. "I processed the Hero Public Safety Commission's Blackline budget request for 6 years," he said. "I never once asked what asset KT external resolution was. I never asked. It was a line item, and I initialed it, and I went home and had dinner." His jaw worked. "I watched a Jumbotron 4 months ago, and I have not slept properly since. So when I heard the rain hit and the phones went dead, I came down here and I opened the door because I would rather be the man who opened it than the man who was standing behind it." Rikuto Ozaki lowered the crowbar. "Take us to the security detail," he said. "You do the talking. Nobody gets hurt if nobody's stupid." Nobody got hurt. The security detail put 12 pistols into a laundry cart because the man who had processed their overtime for 6 years asked them to. The 11 members of the House on the 4th floor were escorted into the main chamber and told to sit down, and one of them, a man in his 70s who had been elected 9 times, stood up and demanded to know by what authority, and Rikuto looked at him and said, "Sit down, sir." And the man sat down because the lizard had not raised his voice and had not needed to. Rikuto Ozaki stood in the chamber of the National Diet at 2:41 in the morning with a crowbar he had never used, and he did not know what to do with his hands. 16 people were waiting on him. 340 people in the building were waiting on him. He had put his fist through an engine block in year 3 and cried about it, and this was harder. He took out his radio. "Diet's secure," he said. "No casualties. Say again, no casualties." Nagant's voice came back through the rain from a rooftop 11 kilometers away, dry as sand. "Copy. Nice work, Ozaki. Sit tight. Don't make any speeches." "Wasn't going to." "You were absolutely going to." He did not make a speech. He sat down on the steps of the chamber floor with the crowbar across his knees and waited for dawn, and at some point a cleaner in her 60s brought him a cup of tea because she did not know what else to do with herself. And he took it and said, "Thank you, ma'am," and she went away and cried in a supply closet about nothing she could have named. In Yokohama, at Rinkai General Hospital, Sen Ashizu walked in through the main doors at 1:50 a.m. in a coat that was too thin for the weather, with 11 people behind him and a briefcase in his hand, and stopped in the middle of the lobby under the fluorescent lights. It was chaos in there. It had been chaos in there since 12 minutes past midnight. The healing wing on the 3rd floor had 11 recovery-type staff on rotation, and every single one of them had stopped working within the same 9-minute window, and there were 40 patients in that wing who had been scheduled to be closed up and sent home in the morning, and who were now surgical cases in a hospital that had not performed real surgery on that volume in 19 years. Because that was the thing about quirk medicine. It was cheaper, it was faster, it photographed well. And it had eaten the profession alive from the inside over 2 generations, until the operating theaters were used for teaching and the young doctors coming out of school had 11 hours of blade time and a diploma. Ashizu stood in the lobby and watched a 28-year-old resident stand over a man with an open abdomen and shake so hard he could not hold a clamp. Then he set the briefcase down on the reception counter and said, loudly enough to carry, "Everybody stop." Not everybody stopped, but enough did. My name is Sen Ashizu. I was a general surgeon in this building for 19 years. I applied for chief of department 11 times. He unbuttoned his coat. The healing wing is closed. As of this morning, it is permanently closed, and it will be gutted and turned back into what it was in 1998, which was 6 operating theaters and a recovery ward. And from this morning forward, medicine in this country is going to be practiced by people who studied it. A woman in administration started to say something about authority. There are 40 patients on the 3rd floor who are going to die by Thursday if somebody does not open them properly, Ashizu said, and his voice did not rise, and it went through her like a nail. You can spend the next 4 hours asking who authorized me, or you can put on a mask and hold retraction, and I will teach you what a liver looks like. He rolled his sleeves. I have been ready for this morning for a decade. Get me Theater 2. Get me every person in this building who has ever completed a residency, and somebody find me a scrub nurse over 50, because the ones over 50 know things. Somebody found him a scrub nurse over 50. Her name was Yoshi Tanabe, and she had been at Rinkai for 31 years, and had watched the operating theaters be turned into storage. And when he told her what he wanted, she looked at him and said, "Dr. Ashizu, I have been waiting to be asked that question since 2019. He operated for 19 hours. He talked the entire time out loud in a voice that carried to the observation gallery, where 11 residents and 4 attendings crowded in on each other and watched a quirkless man in his 50s do work. Most of them had only seen an archived video. He said the names of things. He said them again. He made the shaking 28-year-old scrub in and put his hands inside a human being and told him where to go. And at hour 6, the young man's hands stopped shaking and did not shake again for the rest of his career. At hour 19, Ashizu came out into the corridor and sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his gloves still on. And Yoshi Tanabe brought him a bottle of water and sat down next to him. And neither of them said anything for a while. "How many?" she said eventually. 31 out of 40. 3 I could not have saved with a hospital from heaven, and 6 were already too far. He closed his eyes. It should have been 40. If this building had kept its hands in practice, it would have been 40. "It'll be 40 next time," Yoshi said. Ashizu laughed once, thin and cracked. "Yeah," he said. "It will." Out in the city, the red was still in the sky, and the specific texture of the world had changed in 126 million small ways at once. And almost none of them made the news, because there was no news. In Shinjuku, on a curb outside a shuttered agency office, a ranked hero called Backdraft sat down in his costume in the rain and flicked his thumb against his palm. Nothing. He did it again. He had done it maybe 900 times since midnight. He was 46 years old, and he had been able to produce water pressure out of his hands since he was 4. And he had built a body and a career and a marriage and a mortgage and a personality on top of it. And now his thumb went across his palm and made the sound a thumb makes. A young man walked past him in a soaked hoodie and stopped and came back. "Hey," the young man said. "Hey, do you need something?" Backdraft looked up. It took him a moment to work out that he was the one being asked. "I can't do it," he said. "Yeah," the young man said. "Nobody can." "No, you don't understand, son. I do it. That's what I do. Traffic accidents, chemical fires, 22 years. He held up his hand and looked at it. "There's a fire in Ueno right now. There's a fire right now, and I can hear it on the radio, and I'm sitting on a curb." The young man stood there in the rain. He was 19. He had been quirkless since the day the doctor found the joints between his toe, and he had spent his entire life being told to get out of the way by men in costumes. And he did not have the first idea what to feel about the man crying on the curb in front of him, so he did the only thing available. "Okay," he said, and he put out a hand. "Get up. There's a fire in Ueno. I don't have anything either. Let's go carry something." Backdraft looked at the hand for a long second. Then he took it. At Yotsuya Crossing, An officer of the Metropolitan Police named Sugimoto stood in the middle of the intersection with his radio in his hand and looked at his own feet. He had been a speed type, not a famous one. He had been the man they sent when a purse got taken, because he could cross 900 meters in 11 seconds and be standing in front of the runner with his arms folded. And he had done that maybe 600 times in 14 years. And it had made him good at his job in a way he had never had to examine. There had been a call 3 minutes ago, a convenience store on Sotobori Dori. 2 men taking the register. He had turned toward it, and his legs had done what legs do. He was still standing in the intersection. The rain came down on him, and the traffic lights cycled for cars that were not moving. And Officer Sugimoto held his radio and understood that the thing that had told him who he was for 14 years had been switched off, and that he was going to have to walk to the convenience store. So he walked. It took him 4 minutes. When he got there, the 2 men were gone, and the clerk was on the floor behind the counter with a split lip, and Sugimoto got down on his knees on the linoleum and pressed a cold pack to the man's face with one hand, and called an ambulance that would not come for 90 minutes with the other, and he stayed there the whole time, which he had never once done before, because he had always been somewhere else already. At a bus shelter in Shinagawa, a woman named Chiyo Ueda sat down on the wet pavement in the rain. She was 57, and she had been born with 4 arms. The upper 2 had gone first, around 12:20. She had felt it as a coldness and then as an absence, and then she had watched them over about 90 minutes reduce and reabsorb and be gone, which the compound did without any pain at all, which was the part she found unbearable. 57 years of shop windows and school corridors, and the specific way people looked at her on trains, and the man who had left her in 1994 because his mother could not sit at a table with her, and it went away without hurting. She sat down on the pavement outside a bus shelter and looked at the 2 arms she had left. She could not work out what she felt. That was the whole of it. She sat there for an hour, trying to sort it into something with a name, and it refused. And it kept refusing, and eventually she stopped trying and just sat in the rain with her 2 ordinary hands on her 2 ordinary knees, crying about a body she had hated her entire life and grieving it anyway, both at once, all the way through, because a person can be both, and there is no rule that says otherwise. A man came out of the shelter and stood over her with an umbrella. He did not say anything. He just held it there for 40 minutes until the bus came, and then he helped her up and did not look at her arms. And it was the first time in 57 years that a stranger had held something over her head and not looked. And in Adachi, at 4 a.m, a 40-year-old man named Takumi Honda walked through the middle of a public street with his hands out of his pockets. He had been quirkless his whole life. He worked in a warehouse. He was 5'11", and he weighed 190 pounds. And he had spent 22 years apologizing for standing in rooms, which is a thing that happens to quirkless men in a world where the guy at the next desk can bench a car, and it goes in so early and so deep that you stop knowing you were doing it. He apologized when people bumped into him. He apologized when he got to a door first. He had once apologized to a hero who stepped on his foot. At 4 a.m, he walked down the middle of a street in Adachi, past a man in a hero costume who was sitting on a wall with his head in his hands, and he did not step around him. He got about 50 meters past and then stopped and stood there in the rain with his heart going, because he had just understood something, and the understanding was too big to hold standing still. There was nobody stronger than him anymore. Not the man on the wall, not the ones on the billboards. Not the smirking kid at the warehouse who could crush a coffee cup with a thought and had spent 4 years calling him grandpa. Nobody in this entire city, this entire country, was physically above Takumi Honda this morning, and he did not know what to do with that. And the not knowing was the most alive he had felt since he was 18 years old. He stood in the rain and laughed. It came out wrong, wet and ragged, and he did not care. Then he walked home and sat on the end of his bed and looked at his hands, and then he got up and got dressed for work because it was Friday, and because in the middle of everything else in the whole world, there are still Fridays. 11 kilometers away on a burning roof, Izuku Midoriya lifted his head again. The signal was closer. It came across the city the way a compass needle comes around, thin, hot, refusing to be anything other than pointed at him. Green. He could feel the shape of it, and the shape of it was familiar in a way that had nothing to do with the last 5 years. It was his mother's stubbornness wired to his stepfather's will and set on fire. It was moving in a straight line, and it had stopped detouring. "She's coming up through Nagatacho," Nagant said. She had a tablet under her coat to keep the rain off it, and 11 spotters feeding her, and her voice had gone flat and professional, which was what her voice did when she was frightened. "She's got company." "How many?" "Aizawa, Todoroki, the Uraraka girl." A pause. 14 students behind them, on and off, some of them peeled at Hibiya, and there's a line forming on Sakurada Dori. Pros, real ones. "How many pros?" 91 that I can count, and more walking in from the east. Nagant lowered the tablet. Endeavor's at the front of it. Izuku looked out at the city. "Powerless," he said. "Completely. Every single one of them." She wiped her face. Enji Todoroki is standing in a street in Chiyoda in a costume with nothing coming off his hands, and 90 men behind him in the same condition, and he's not moving. Midoriya, he knows what happened at the stadium. He watched Kamino on television like everybody else. He knows. Yes. Then why? Izuku was quiet for a moment. "Because it is all he has left," he said. "The man has one thing. He is bringing it." Nitin looked at the side of his face and did not like what she found there because it was not contempt. It would have been easier if it was contempt. They came up Sakurada Dori at 4:52 in the morning in the last of the dark, and it looked on the 4 working traffic cameras that were still uploading like a funeral procession that had gotten confused about the direction. Izumi Yagi walked at the front. She was 17 years old, and she was in a UA. Gym uniform, because everything else she owned was in a dormitory that had a wall missing. And there was green lightning coming off her shoulders in an unsteady crackle that arced down her arms and grounded out into the wet asphalt at every step and left small black stars burned into the road behind her. She had her father's jaw. She had her mother's face. She had not slept in about 40 hours, and her eyes were the eyes of somebody who had stopped negotiating with herself. Around her, floating, keeping pace, were about 200 objects. Chunks of curb, a traffic sign, sections of a collapsed hoarding. A steel bollard she had torn out of the pavement outside the diet without breaking stride. They orbited her in a loose cloud at head height, and they did not wobble. And the pro heroes she passed on the way got out of the road for her, because they had all felt what came off a one-for-all holder, and none of them had ever felt it coming off a teenager who... crying. Shuda Aizawa walked at her left shoulder. He had his capture weapon wound around both forearms and gripped in both fists, and there was nothing behind it. No quirk. His eyes were ordinary brown, and his hair hung flat and wet down his back, and the scarf in his hands was a length of high-tensile carbon fiber weave and nothing more, which was, as it happened, still a garrote and a snare and a whip in the hands of a man who had spent 30 years learning 11 ways to use it and had never once relied on his eyes to do it. He had told her to sit down. She had not sat down. So he was walking beside her because that was the job. That had always been the job. And the job had never once had anything to do with a quirk. Shoto Todoroki walked on her right, and he walked like a stranger to himself. He had been carrying a scar and a purpose since he was 5. Half of him had been fire and half of him had been ice. And every single thing he had ever thought about who he was had been organized around the line down the middle. He had put his left hand out 4 times since midnight, in the courtyard, in the corridor, twice in the street, and gotten nothing. And the 4th time he had stood there for a full minute with his palm open and had felt something he could not identify. He'd eventually identified it around Toranamon, and the identification had been so disorienting that he had nearly stopped walking. It was relief. He kept that behind his teeth. Ochako Uraraka walked behind the 3 of them in jeans and a jacket that was not hers, with her arm out of the sling, because the sling had been for a quirk-related soft tissue injury, and there seemed to be no point anymore. She had been in the corridor outside room 4 of an intensive care wing in Osaka 11 days ago. She had gotten on a train. She had gotten off the train at a station where a man was selling coffee from a cart and shouting that the sky was red, and had gone to the UA courtyard and sat against a broken pillar in the rain. And then Azumi had stood up, and Ochako had stood up too, and nobody had asked her to. She had nothing, not 1 gram of zero gravity. She had felt it go at 12:19, and she had put her fingertips on the wall of a hospital corridor and pushed over and over, and the wall had stayed heavy. She was not walking to fight. She knew, in a way she had never known anything, that there was no fight available to her. She was walking because 5 years ago, she had stood under an awning behind a school building in the rain and said 7 words about being fragile. And she had spent every day since then paying interest on those 7 words and had never once gotten near the principal. On Sakurada Dori, in front of the last standing barricade, the Metropolitan Police had managed to put up 91 professional heroes had formed a line. They had assembled without being ordered, which is a thing that had never happened in the history of the profession. There was no commission to order them. The building that ordered them was on fire. So they had come out of agencies and apartments, and one from a wedding reception and one from a hospital where his sidekick had died at 12:40 from a quirk-dependent circulatory condition, and they had walked to Chiyoda and stood in a line in the road because standing in a line in the road was the only thing they knew how to do with themselves. Endeavor stood at the front of it. Enji Todoroki was 52 years old and 6'4" and 240 pounds. He was in full costume. The costume had a flame management system built into it that was now a set of very expensive metal plates. He had spent 40 years being the second strongest human being in Japan, and had spent the last 5 months being the first. And at 8 minutes past 12, he had stood outside his own agency in the red rain and tried 900 times to make a flame and had produced nothing, and had sat down on a curb in his costume looking at his palms. He had sat there for 2 hours. Then he had stood up because a thing had occurred to him. And the thing was this: he had not been strong because of the fire. He had been strong because he had trained 11 hours a day for 35 years, and the fire had ridden on top of that. And he had spent 35 years telling himself and everyone in his house that the fire was the point, and he had been wrong. And the being wrong had cost him a family. So he had gotten up off the curb and walked to Chiyoda. He looked down the road at the girl with green lightning on her shoulders, and he did not try to stop her. "Yagi," he said. Izumi stopped. The cloud of debris around her went still. "You're going to him." "Yes." Endeavor's jaw moved. "You know what he did in Camino?" "I watched it on a screen in the back of a support truck," Izumi said. "I watched him put his hand through my dad's chest, and I heard what my dad said, and if you're about to tell me the math, don't. Aizawa did the math for 9 kilometers. Endeavor looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned around and faced up the road toward the burning building 11 blocks away and the red light on top of it, and he said to 91 heroes standing in the rain with nothing in their hands, "The girl goes through. We hold the street." Somebody down the line said, "Sir, with respect, hold it with what?" "With our bodies," Endeavor said. "That is what is left. If you have a problem with that, walk home, and I will not think less of you, and I will not remember your name." 11 of them walked home. 80 stayed. Down the road from the direction of the burning building, 4 figures came out of the rain. They were in gray. They came at a walk, 4 abreast, and they stopped about 30 meters from the line and stood there in the road with their hands at their sides. They were not big. That was the first thing everybody noticed, and the thing nobody knew what to do with. 2 men, 2 women. The tallest of them was maybe 5'10". One of the women had a face that was mostly bird, a hummingbird's face, sharp and narrow with a long, thin bill, and she was maybe 20, and there was a scar across the bridge of it. Her name was Mika Toyota, and she had been 16 and quirkless outside a noodle shop in Chiba with a black eye, and she had been the first. Beside her stood a man named Goro Ehara, 34, quirkless, a former forklift driver. Beside him, a woman named Aoi Sakaki, 26, a heteromorph with skin like wet stone, whose quirk had been the skin and nothing else, and who had lost the quirk at 12:14 and still had the skin, because the compound took the factor and left the body it had built. And beside her, a man everybody in the deep called Nine. Because he had come in with no name, he was willing to give and had been the ninth through the door in the 4 people. In gray, in the rain. The line of 80 pro heroes looked at them. He sent 4. Somebody said. Yeah, Aizawa said from 30 meters back, and there was something in his voice that made the man beside him turn his head. He sent 4. Endeavor stepped forward out of the line. Move, he said. Mika Toyota tilted her head, which is a thing that hummingbird faces do, and said, in a voice that was small and clear and perfectly steady, Midoriya says the girl goes through. Everybody else stays here. That is not how this is going to work. It's how it's going to work. Mika said, you just haven't found out yet. Endeavor came in. He came in fast for a man his size, and he came in correctly, which was the thing that made it awful to watch afterward. He had 35 years of hand-to-hand in him, and had been taught by professionals, and had used it in 79 documented engagements. And he opened with a low lead hook into Goro Ohara's ribs that would have folded a lesser man in half. It landed. It landed fully. Goro's feet came off the ground, and he went 4 meters and hit the road and rolled. Endeavor did not look at him. He was already turning, and he caught Aoi Sakaki with an elbow that broke her nose in 2 places and put her on 1 knee, 2 of them down in 4 seconds. The line behind him made a sound. Then Mika Toyota hit him in the knee. She did it from the outside, low, with the heel of her foot, and she did it while stepping in, and the knee went the way knees go. Enji Todoroki's leg folded sideways, and he did not scream. And afterward, the fact that he did not scream was noted in 4 separate accounts. He got a hand into her hair and threw her. She went 11 meters and came down on her shoulder in the road and got up. That was the moment the 80 heroes standing in the rain understood something. 9 came in from the left, while Endeavor's weight was still committed, and put a straight punch into the side of his head. Not a haymaker. A straight punch thrown from the hip with the whole body behind it, 4 inches of travel, and it took Endeavor's vision out of his left eye for 9 seconds. Goro Ohara was already back up with blood in his mouth and no expression on his face, and he came in and took the bad leg out from under him with a shin. Endeavor went down on 1 knee in the street. He got up. He got up, and that was the part they put in the documentaries 11 years later, because a 52-year-old man with a destroyed knee and no vision on one side got up in the road in Chiyoda in front of 80 of his colleagues, and he swung, and the swing was still good enough to break Aoi Sakaki's jaw. She spat and kept coming. They took him apart over the next 60 seconds. They did it without a single flourish. Nainago worked the legs. Mika worked inside, in short, vicious increments, elbows and heels and the flat of her hand into the joints. And Aoi Sakaki, whose jaw was in 2 pieces, took the arm that mattered and hyperextended it at the elbow against her own shoulder, with a sound the microphones caught. Enji Todoroki went face down on Sakura the Dory at 5:01 a.m. He was conscious. He was trying to get an elbow under himself. His costume was open at the chest, and there was rain running through his hair, and he was not making a sound. Mika Toyota put a knee on his spine and leaned down and said something in his ear that 4 cameras caught the shape of, but no microphone caught the sound of. Afterwards, she never told anybody what it was, and Endeavor never told anybody either. And the 2 of them took it to their graves 51 and 39 years later, respectively. But the expression that came onto Enji Todoroki's face while she said it, that got filmed. All 4 cameras got that. It was not pain. He had lived in pain for 40 years. It was not humiliation either, not exactly. It was the face of a man who has just understood that the thing he organized his entire life around was the thing that got switched off 4 hours ago, and that the thing he threw away, the discipline, the house, the 4 children, the wife in a hospital, the son with the scar who was standing 30 meters up the road watching him lose, that was the part that would have carried. He had had it backwards for 35 years. He found out on his face in a road. Shadow Todoroki watched his father go down and did not move, and something in his chest neither broke nor healed, and he could not have told you which he had wanted. Then Aizawa stepped forward. "Hold the line," he said to nobody in particular, to 80 men and women behind him who had just watched 4 people flatten the number 2 hero in 90 seconds. "Nobody follow me." "Aizawa, nobody follow me." He unwound about 2 meters of the capture weapon off his left forearm and let it hang, and he took the rest in his right hand in a loop, and he walked out into the middle of the road with an ordinary man's eyes and a strip of cloth. 9 came at him first. Aizawa let him come, turned his hip out of the line of it, and put 4 meters of carbon weave around 9's ankle in a motion that took under 1/3 of a second, and then he pulled, and 9 went down onto his own face at speed. Aizawa was on him before he stopped moving, one knee into the shoulder joint, and he broke the collarbone with a downward strike from his elbow, and had the weapon off the ankle and re-looped before Goro Ohara arrived. Goro arrived, and Aizawa was not where he had been. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. Shota Aizawa had spent 30 years fighting people who could do things he could not, and the way he had survived it was by never once being where the other person had put his weight. And none of that had anything to do with erasure. Erasure had been a tool. This was the craft. He took Goro's arm as it came past, redirected it, stepped through, and put the man's face into the barricade. Goro's cheekbone went. He came off the barricade anyway, and Aizawa hit him 3 times in the same spot under the ribs. 3 in about a second, all in the same place. And Goro Ohara sat down in the road and stopped being part of it. Aoi Sakaki came in with a broken jaw, and Aizawa put the weapon across her throat and her own weight against her. And she was strong, and she was stone-skinned, and she still went down, because a garrote does not care about your muscles. 3. He had put down 3 of them in 19 seconds, and the 80 heroes behind the barricade were screaming his name, and it was the loudest that road got all morning. Then Mika Toyota hit him in the kidney. He had known where she was. That was the terrible part, and he thought about it for the rest of his life. He had known exactly where she was, and he had accepted the kidney to keep the geometry on the other 3, and it had been the correct trade, and it still put a white flash across his vision and took the strength out of his left side for 2 seconds. 2 seconds is a very long time. She was inside his arms. He got the weave up and around her neck, and she went with it instead of against it, which is the thing you learn in year 4, this to happen. And her elbow came up into his sternum, and then her heel came down on the outside of his knee, and Shuta Aizawa's leg stopped doing its job. He went down onto his back in the road. He started getting up. That is in the footage. It is 9 seconds long, and it has been viewed a great many times, and what it shows is a 30-something teacher with a broken knee and a bleeding kidney and 1 working arm on his back in the rain, getting his good leg under himself and pushing and getting 11 inches off the road and then getting hit again and starting over. Mika Toyota looked at Goro, who was sitting in the road holding his face. She looked at 9, who was not getting up. She looked at Aoi on all 4s, spitting. Then she looked back down at Aizawa, and there was something on her narrow bird's face that was very close to respect. "Sir," she said, "please stop." "No," Aizawa said, and got another 4 inches. A 4th soldier came out of the rain, a big man, 38, a heteromorph with a beak, who had spent 4 years at the front of a training hall and 11 months at a security desk in Shibuya, and he did not hit Aizawa. He knelt down and put 1 hand flat on Aizawa's chest and pressed him to the road and held him there. That is how it ended. Not a knockout, not a blow. 1 hand on his sternum and the whole weight of a man behind it, and Shota Aizawa lay in the road on Sakurada Dori with his hands still working at the capture weapon and got no further, and the 4 of them stood around him and did not touch him again. Behind the barricade, 80 professional heroes did not come forward. Nobody has ever fully explained that. 80 of them. They had watched 4 people in gray dismantle the number 2 hero and the most technically accomplished field instructor in the country, and there were 80 of them and 4 of the others, and not one of them stepped over that barricade. The best explanation anybody has ever given came from a hero named Kamui Woods, who was 28 that morning and had lost the ability to make wood at 12:11, and who said in an interview 9 years later, "You have to understand what we were. We weren't fighters. Some of us were a few, Aizawa was. Most of us were operators of a thing. We ran a quirk for a living, and the quirk was 90% of every fight we'd ever been in. And that morning we found out what the other 10% was worth in a street against people who had nothing but the 10% and had been sharpening it every morning at 4 for 5 years. He looked at his hands in that interview. I've thought about it for 9 years. We didn't step over the barricade because there was nothing on our side of it. And once you know that about yourself, you can't unknow it. Shoto Todoroki walked out from behind the line and stood in the road about 10 meters from where his father was lying face down and looked at both of his hands. Left. Right. He turned them over. He turned them back. There was rain on both palms and nothing else. And he stood there for maybe 11 seconds while the whole ruined street watched him do it. And then Sho Todoroki turned around and walked away up Sakura Dodori in the direction he had come from. And he did not look back, and nobody stopped him. Nobody condemned him either. Not that morning and not afterward. It was the most honest thing he had ever done, and the 80 men and women behind the barricade understood it perfectly, and half of them followed him within the hour. Izumi Yagi walked past all of it. She walked past Endeavor face down in the road, and past Aizawa on his back with a hand on his chest, and past 3 of the 4 soldiers sitting in the street bleeding, and none of them moved to stop her because they had been told the girl goes through, and because in 5 years, nobody in the deep had ever needed to be told a thing twice. At the far end of the barricade, Hawks stepped in front of her. He was 24 and he had no wings. They had come out over about 90 minutes, starting at 12:20. Not torn, not cut, just released, the follicles giving up their hold one after another, and he had stood on a rooftop in Fukuoka and let them go, and by dawn there had been a red drift of them around his boots, and a young man standing in it with an ordinary human spine and an ordinary human back, and no idea what to do with either. He had gotten on the first plane that was still flying, which was a cargo turboprop, and he had been in Chiyoda since 4. He put out one arm. Behind him, 11 UA students bunched up and stopped. "Izumi," he said, "move." In a second, he wiped rain off his face with his free hand, and he looked at her, and there was no cleverness left in him at all, which was the strangest thing about the moment for everyone who witnessed it, because Keigo Takami had been made out of cleverness since he was 6. "You know we can't win this." Izumi's jaw set. "I watched Kamino on a monitor," Hawks said. "I had my hand on my earpiece, and I was telling every hero in 3 prefectures, do not engage. And they listened to me, and that's the only good decision I've ever made that nobody's going to thank me for." He killed the strongest man who has ever lived in about 4 seconds. Then he killed All Might. Then it rained. He shook his head slowly. "There isn't a plan. There isn't a trick. There isn't a clever angle where somebody like me gets in the side door and it works out. I've spent my whole life being the guy who finds the side door, and I am telling you, as a professional, there is no door." "I know," Izumi said. Hawks blinked. "You think I don't know?" Her voice did not rise. "I've known since the stadium. I sat in a car park behind a hospital in Osaka 3 weeks ago and did the numbers until 4 in the morning, and there is no number." Green lightning arced off her shoulder and grounded into the road and left a star. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Izumi Yagi looked up the road at the burning building and the red light on top of it. "Somebody in that family has to stand in front of him," she said. "That's it. That's the whole thing. It's not a plan, and it's not a strategy, and it isn't going to work." She looked back at him. "You're not a coward, Hawks. You're the only person on this street doing arithmetic instead of theater. But I'm going anyway, and you're going to let me, because there's no version of you that stops a one-for-all holder with your bare hands, and we both know it." Hawks stood there in the rain with his arm out, then he lowered it. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She walked past him. Ochako Uraka went past him 4 seconds later, and he did not put his arm out at all, because he had looked at her face and understood that whatever was happening in there had stopped taking input from other people some time ago. The Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters had been 11 stories of gray glass, and it was now 11 stories of gray glass with 3 floors on fire, and the eastern corner gone. and the plaza in front of it was 400 meters of open stone with a dead fountain in the middle. By 5:20 in the morning, there were, by later estimate, somewhere between 9 and 11,000 people watching from the surrounding streets. They were on the fire escapes of the buildings on Uchiboridori. They were on the roofs of 2 parking structures and a hotel. They were leaning out of windows 9 floors up in office blocks that had been evacuated at 1 in the morning and reoccupied at 4 by people who had nowhere else to be and wanted to see. They had phones. Almost every phone in that city was pointed at the same 400 meters of stone. The broadcast infrastructure was down except for one channel, NHK's national uplink out of Studio 9 in Shibuya, which was running because the Deep had taken the building and left it running. Because Izuku had said the country watches, 41 million households were on that feed at 5:20 in the morning on a Friday. It remains the largest live audience in Japanese history. Izumi Yagi walked out into the middle of the plaza and stopped. The cloud of debris around her settled onto the stone in a wide ring. 200 objects coming to rest at once with a sound like a rock slide, finishing. She stood there with her hands loose in green lightning crawling up and down her arms in thin, unsteady lines. Behind her at the plaza's edge, Ochako Uraka stopped and did not come further. And then the red light came off the roof. It did not come fast. That was what 9,000 people said afterward and what 41 million people saw. It could have come fast. Instead, it came the way a man comes down a staircase he owns, and the aura arrived before he did, rolling out ahead of him down 11 stories of burning building and out across the plaza in a wave that everybody standing in that ring of streets felt on their skin at the same instant. The crowd moved back, not in panic. In one long involuntary shuffle, a step at a time, thousands of people finding without deciding to that they wanted to be a little further away. And the wide, empty ring around the plaza got wider by 9 meters over the course of about a minute, and nobody in it noticed they were doing it until they had done it. The rain stopped reaching the stone. It turned to steam 11 meters out and rose in a slow white wall around the edges of the plaza, and inside that wall the ground was dry, and it was the first dry ground in Tokyo in 5 hours. Izuku Midoriya landed 50 meters from his sister. The stone did not crack under his boots. It cracked in a ring 9 meters out, all the way around him in one instant, like the plaza had flinched. He straightened up, black coat, black shirt, the build of a loading dock, gray eyes with the green long since gone out of them, and around him, a slow, heavy crimson that made the burning building behind him look like a candle. He looked at her, and the world watched him do it. The quality of that silence has been written about for decades. 9,000 people in the streets, and not one of them making a sound. 41 million households with the volume up. 2 people in the middle of 400 meters of dry stone in a wet city, 50 meters apart, sharing a mother and a house and a hallway and 5 years of a lie, seeing each other properly for the first time in their lives. Izumi spoke first. She had to try twice. The first time, nothing came out. "I threw you into the wall outside the bathroom when I was 9, she said. The words went out over the plaza and up into 9,000 phones and out to 41 million households. You'd taken the last of the strawberry milk. You didn't know it was the last of it. I got angry and I put you into the wall with my mind and you split your lip on the doorframe and Mom asked what happened and you said you tripped." Her voice was perfectly level. "You said you tripped. I stood right there and let you say it." Izuku did not move. "I did it again when I was 10. Twice when I was 11. I don't have the exact number and I've tried to make one, and there isn't one because I did it enough times that it stopped being an event." She swallowed. "I learned the word at school. Somebody in my year said it about a kid in the grade below, and I brought it home and I used it on you at the dinner table, and Mom said, 'Izumi, be nice,' and Dad said hero conduct starts at home, and then Dad went to a press conference and Mom made dinner and nothing happened to me. Nothing ever happened to me. Not once, not one single time, and I was 11 years old and I understood exactly what that meant, and I kept doing it." Somewhere in the crowd a woman was crying audibly and had covered her mouth too late. "You were easy," Izumi said. "That's why. I want to say it out loud on this street. with everybody listening because I have never said it out loud, and I have been carrying it since I was 13. You were easy, and everybody in that house had already decided you didn't count. And I was a kid. And kids find the thing the house has already decided doesn't count, and they take it apart because nobody stops them. Green lightning cracked off her wrist. That's not an excuse. It's just what happened. And then you jumped, and there was a shoe on the bridge. And they dragged the river for 6 days, and I asked Mom every night if they'd found you. And then one morning, she and Dad were sitting in the kitchen, and they stopped talking when I came in. And I spent 5 years, every single person who asked me that my brother had been struggling. Her jaw worked. I said it in interviews. I said it to my class. I said it to a commission counselor when I was 15, and she wrote it down and nodded. He was struggling privately. We were getting him help. I said it in an entrance exam essay. Her eyes were streaming, and her voice had not moved a millimeter off level. I ate that lie for 5 years, and I fed it to everybody who asked. And I found out it was a lie in a stadium in front of 60,000 people. From you. The rain came down on 9,000 people, and not one of them spoke. I'm not going to ask you to forgive anything, Izumi said. I heard what you said to my father. I know exactly how much forgiving there is. Izuku Midoriya looked at his sister across 50 meters of dry stone. His face carried nothing at all. That is what the cameras got. Not hatred, not satisfaction, not grief, not any of the things 9,000 people were desperate to find in it. Say the rest, he said. Izumi wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I'm going to fight you. I know. I can't beat you. She said it without a tremor. I've had 11 days with about a fifth of one for all and a telekinesis that got me second place at a school sports day. You killed all for one in under a second, and you did it with a look. There's no world where I win this. Then why? Because if nobody in this family stands in front of you, Izumi said, then the thing that comes after tonight gets built entirely out of fear. She let that stand. You're right, she said. That's what nobody on this street will say out loud, then, huh? So I'll say it. You are right about all of it. About the house, about the hallway, about what they made you say you were, about a country where a man looks at an x-ray of your foot and hands you your whole life at 4 years old. You're right, and my father was wrong, and my mother was wrong, and I was wrong, and everything you did to that stadium was true. But being right is not the same as being allowed. And if the only thing left in the world after tonight is a man nobody ever stood in front of, then whatever gets built here gets built on people looking at the sky and being afraid. And I would rather be dead on this stone than be the last Yagi who watched that happen and did nothing about it. She rolled her shoulders. Green lightning came up her spine in a sheet. So I'm going to lose in front of 40 million people, Izumi Yagi said. But somebody is going to have stood here. That's the whole point. That's it. Izuku Midoriya was silent for a long time, long enough that 9,000 people began to shift, long enough that the man holding the steadiest phone on the roof of the parking structure on Uchibori-dori started to think later that he had caught something in that pause that the audio did not. Then he said, "You were 13 when they wrote that sentence." "I was." "You did not write it." "I said it," Izumi said. "For 5 years. That's mine." "Yes," Izuku said, "it is." He took one step forward, and the ring of cracked stone widened by 9 meters. "You fight for a world that erased me," he said. "You put on their uniform. You took their power out of their dying hands. You walked up a road in it with 90 of them behind you. The aura pulsed, and the steam wall at the plaza's edge blew outward, and the crowd on Uchibori-dori went back another step. That world named me nothing and then killed me and then lied about how. There is no part of it worth defending, and you came here to defend it anyway. I came here to stand in front of you. You came in their clothes." Izumi looked down at the UA gym uniform. "It's what I had," she said, and Izuku Midoriya's mouth did something for about a quarter of a second that was not a smile and was not anything else that has a name. "I do not hate what you are," he said. "I hate what made you." Izumi Yagi's face came apart for exactly 1 second, and then she put it back together, which was a thing she had learned from her father without ever knowing she was learning it. "I know," she said. "You have your father's will." The aura climbed. The air above him bent. It is not enough. I know that too. She attacked, 17 years old, in a gym uniform, with a fifth of a legacy and a telekinesis and 11 days of practice, and she attacked the strongest thing that has ever existed on the surface of the earth, and 41 million people watched her do it. What she did first was correct, and the fact that it was correct is why the fight lasted as long as it did. She did not close. She dropped both hands and the entire ring of debris she had walked in with. 200 objects, curbstones and bollards and hoarding sections and a traffic sign, and 11 meters of steel handrail came off the plaza floor at once and went into him from every direction simultaneously. It hit the boundary 2 feet off his skin and turned into powder. Not broken. Powder. 200 objects went to grit in the space of a heartbeat, and the grit hung in the air around him in a cloud that his aura lit red from the inside. And Izuku Midoriya took another step forward through it. Izumi was already moving. Green lightning fired down her legs, and she was gone off the mark she had been standing on, and the mark burned black in the shape of 2 feet, and she crossed 30 meters in a fraction of a second and put her fist into the eastern face of the commission building instead. 9 floors of curtain wall came off the frame. She did not throw it. She drove it. She got behind 1,100 square meters of glass and steel and aluminum, with everything her telekinesis had, and she drove it flat into her brother's chest at the speed of a falling building. The impact went out across Chiyoda in a bang that broke windows 4 blocks away. Glass went up in a fountain 9 stories high. The frame folded around him. There was a second of nothing but noise and debris, and the crowd on the fire escapes ducked and came back up, and Izuku Midoriya walked out of the wreckage of it. The coat was smoking at the shoulder. He was walking. He had not changed pace, and he had not raised his hands, and his eyes were exactly where they had been. And the aura was slowly grinding the last of the curtain wall off itself as he moved, aluminum going to slag and dripping off him onto the stone. Somebody on the parking structure roof said, "He didn't stop," and his phone caught it. And that clip has 900 million views. Izumi hit him from above. She came down out of the rain with green lightning wrapped around her right arm, from shoulder to knuckle, and she put a full force, one-for-all strike into the crown of his head from a 9-story drop. The plaza floor went. It went in a crater 14 meters across, and the shockwave took the dead fountain apart and blew the steam wall inside out, and it rolled outward under 9,000 pairs of feet, and every person in that ring of streets felt the stone under them jump. She hit him again before the dust cleared. And again. She was inside the cloud with him, both fists, and every strike landed as a real event with a real sound, cracks going off across Chiyoda like a building being demolished from the inside, and the 5th one caught him under the jaw and moved his head, actually moved it 4 centimeters, and the crowd screamed. Then his hand came up and closed on her wrist, and Izumi Yagi understood what she was holding on to. It was like grabbing the outside of a running engine. It was like putting her arm into a kiln. It was worse than either because it did not give in any direction at all. And for 1 full second, she pulled with everything she had. A 5th of one for all, and every gram of telekinesis and 17 years of a body built by the Hero Public Safety Commission's own tutors. And his arm did not move. He let go. He let go and stepped back and did not throw her, and she went 11 meters anyway because she had been pulling. "Your father hit like that," Izuku said. Izumi came off the ground screaming and tore the street open. That was the part that made the international footage. She got both hands into the road on the plaza's western edge, Uchibori Dori, 4 lanes and a median, and she pulled up 900 tons of asphalt and subgrade and water main and fiber conduit and everything under it in a single continuous sheet. And she stood it up on end like a wall, and then she broke it into about 11,000 pieces and put all 11,000 into them at once. It was a storm. There is no other word that fits, and every reporter who tried a different word went back to storm. It was a solid wall of ballistic rubble filling the entire plaza, going through 9,000 cubic meters of air at once, and it would have buried a tank and unroofed a village and taken the front off a warship. It lasted about 6 seconds and produced a noise that was recorded on seismographs in Saitama. And when it stopped, The plaza had 11,000 pieces of road all over it in drifts, and there was a corridor through the middle of it, 11 meters wide and 40 meters long, where nothing had landed at all, because everything that entered it had gone to powder. And at the end of the corridor, a man in a black coat was walking. He had covered 10 meters. That was all. Out of 50, he had covered 10. In about 90 seconds, at the pace of a man crossing a car park, and she had not made him hurry. Izumi Yagi stood in the wreckage of a national capital's central district with her chest heaving and green lightning stuttering down her arms, and she looked at her brother's face across 30 meters of ruined stone, and she saw it properly for the first time. There was nothing on it. Not strain, not effort, not anger, not triumph, not the faintest tightening around the eyes. She had just done more damage to the city of Tokyo in 90 seconds than any single villain in the recorded history of the profession, and she had put every gram of it into one man, and his expression was the expression of somebody walking to a bus stop. It broke something in her that his hands could not have reached. "Look at me," she said. He was looking at her. "No, look at me." Her voice cracked for the first time. "Do something. React. Put your hands up. Block something. Flinch, I don't care. Do one thing." She hit him with everything again. She tore the facade off the hotel on the north side and drove it. She pulled a 9-meter section of the elevated expressway off its columns and swung it like a club and connected twice. And the second one rang across the city like a bell being struck by an artillery shell. She got in close and put 11 one-for-all strikes into his ribs in under 2 seconds and left green burns on the stone at every landing point. A constellation of them, 40 or 50 by then, all over the plaza. She hit him more times in 3 minutes than anyone had ever hit him. And he walked. The aura took it and discarded it. That was the sensation she could never afterward have described and never had to, because she was dead. She was not hitting a man. She was hitting the outside of something with a boundary on it, and everything she put in went somewhere and did not come back and did not register, and the boundary kept advancing at 4 kilometers an hour. At 20 meters, he said, "You are the best thing they made." At 15 meters, he said, "It changes nothing." At 11 meters, Izumi Yagi stopped fighting and started deciding. She went up. She fired herself 200 meters straight into the red sky above Chiyoda, and she hung there over the burning building, over 9,000 people, over the whole ruined district, and she pulled everything in. Every observer on the ground described it the same way, which is that the light came up. One for all had been 8 generations of accumulated will, and the rain had taken most of it and left an ember, and Izumi Yagi took the ember and stopped hoarding it. She let it all out of the cage at once, the last of the stockpile, the last of the 8, the last of her father's hand on her shoulder in a bare room at UA 11 days after the stadium. And it came up her spine and out of her back and stood in the sky as a pillar of green lightning 400 meters high. It was visible from Yokohama. It was visible from Chiba across the bay. In Kawasaki, people came out of buildings and stood in the street and pointed north. And 11 kilometers away in Setagaya, a woman on a balcony filmed 40 seconds of it and never posted the video because she could not watch it again. The sky over Chiyoda cracked open around the pillar. Actually, cracked. The cloud deck split in a ring 900 meters across, and the black above it showed through, and the red rain in that ring stopped falling and went sideways. Izumi Yagi pulled it all into her right hand. She was crying. She was 17. She had her mother's face and her father's jaw, and she had spent 20 years being everything the house decided to build. And she folded the last of 180 years of inheritance into a fist and put it over her head. And she looked down at the man in the black coat in the middle of a plaza in a wrecked city, and she screamed something that no microphone in the world recovered. Then she came down. Izuku Midoriya raised one hand. The sphere formed above his palm with a low sound of air being taken. It was the size of a fist. 9,000 people on 9,000 phones watched a 400-meter pillar of green lightning fall out of a broken sky toward a man holding something you could close a hand around. And every single one of them understood the shape of what was about to happen, and not one of them could look away from it. The two forces met 11 meters above the plaza floor. For about a fifth of a second, there was a green shell around a red point, and the green was enormous and the red was small, and the small one was not moving. Then the plaza went white. The shockwave stripped the glass out of every building for 300 meters in all directions in one instant. Not floor by floor, all at once, 41,000 panes, a sound like the sky inhaling through its teeth, and 300 meters of central Tokyo lost its windows simultaneously, and the glass went outward and up and hung in the air for a second and a half, like a held breath before it started to come down. Every camera in range lost signal. All of them. Every phone in the ring of streets, the 4 traffic cams, the 2 roof rigs, the NHK relay van on Uchibori Dori. The national feed went to black at 5:31:14 and stayed black for 9 seconds. And those 9 seconds are the most examined 9 seconds in the history of Japanese broadcasting. 6 kilometers away in Ginza, people standing in the street felt the pressure hit them in the sternum, and several of them sat down. In Tokyo Bay, across 4 square kilometers of open water, the surface of the harbor went flat. It just went flat. All the chop pressed out of it at once, and the crews of 2 container ships and 11 fishing boats stood at the rails and looked at a bay that had gone to glass and did not speak. Then the feed came back. What it showed was a crater. The plaza was gone. 400 meters of stone was a bowl 60 meters across and 11 meters deep with glass at the bottom of it, and the eastern third of the Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters had gone down into the hole, and the fires were out because there was nothing left burning. The rain had stopped inside 300 meters. The steam had blown away. The air was clear. Izuku Midoriya was standing in the middle of the bowl with his hand still up, and he lowered it. Izumi Yagi was on the glass 11 meters away. She was on her back. The uniform was gone from the shoulders down on the right side. There was no green anywhere on her. Anywhere. Not on her arms and not on her spine and not in the air around her. And every person watching who understood anything about One for All understood in that moment that there was nothing left of it, not a particle. That the last of 8 generations had gone into a sphere the size of a fist and had not come out the other side. She was breathing. Her right arm was not attached in a way that arms are supposed to be attached. She had glass in her hair. She turned her head and looked up. He came and stood over her, and the crowd in the ruined streets went so still that the NHK audio picked up the sound of water dripping off a broken gutter 90 meters away. Izumi Yagi looked up at her brother. "Hey," she said. Her voice was completely wrecked, and it went out to 41 million households anyway, because the relay van's mast had come down, but the backup mic had survived, and it was 11 meters from her mouth. "I want to tell you something, and I've only got the one go at it, so shut up." Izuku Midoriya said nothing. "You were in my house," Izumi said. "You were in my house for 11 years, and I looked right at you every day, and I never once saw a person." She got air. It was hard work. Not because I couldn't, because nobody in that house made me. It was easier not to. Mom didn't make me, and Dad didn't make me, and the commission tutor didn't make me, and the school didn't make me, and I was a kid, and kids do the easy thing out, and the easy thing was deciding you were furniture. Something moved behind the flat gray of his eyes and did not surface. "And then you were gone, and I got everything," she said. "I got the training room where your bedroom used to be. I got the pictures on the mantle. I got the tutor and the poster and the second place finish. And I got Dad's power out of his own hands in a locked room. And every single thing I have ever had in my life, I had because you were the one they threw away." Her breath caught, and she made it keep going. "I'm not sorry the way people say sorry. I'm the thing they built instead of you. That's what I am. That's all I've ever been." The bowl of glass was silent. "I couldn't touch you," Izumi said, and she laughed, and blood came with it. "I hit you with the whole city. I hit you with everything 8 people spent 180 years saving up. You walked." Her eyes were streaming, and you did all of it from nothing. From a river. Nobody gave you one thing, not one, not ever, and you're lying at the bottom of a bridge with nothing, and you get up and you get here, and I had every advantage a person can be handed in this country, and I couldn't make you take a step back. She got her chin up off the glass, an inch. "So here's the true thing," Izumi Yagi said. They picked wrong. The audio caught it clean. Every single day for 11 years in that house, they picked and they picked me, and they were wrong every time, and I knew it, and you knew it, and Dad knew it at the end. Her head went back down. Tell me you know they were wrong. Izuku Midoriya looked down at his sister for one long breath. I know, he said. Izumi Yagi closed her eyes and something went out of her face that had been there since she was 13 years old. Okay, she said. Do it. He put his hand through her chest. It was the same motion. It went in below the sternum, wrapped in red light, and there was nothing in the world left to rise up and meet it. And it came out the other side, and the light that came out the back of her lit the glass under her for 40 meters. Izumi Yagi died looking up at a sky that had stopped being a furnace and had gone the gray of early morning, and the last of the green went out of the air over Chiyoda, and it did not come back. Izuku Midoriya withdrew his hand. He stayed there. The aura dimmed. It happened over about 11 seconds, and everybody watching saw it, and nobody understood it. The crimson came down out of the air and off his shoulders and pulled in against his skin until it was a low red edge and nothing more. And the temperature in that bowl of glass fell 9 degrees, and the man in the black coat stood over the body of his half-sister in the middle of a crater in the capital of a country he had just ended, and did not move for 11 seconds. That was all it took. 11 seconds. But it was a silence that belonged to nobody else on the surface of the earth, and 41 million people sat in their houses and let him have it, because there was nothing else to do. Then he straightened up and the low red edge stayed low, and he turned around. Ochako Uraraka was standing on the lip of the crater. She had not run. 11,000 people had gone back 9 meters at a time, all through the fight, and Ochako Uraraka had come forward, down off the plaza edge and into the bowl, over the glass, in a jacket that was not hers, and she was standing between Izuku Midoriya and 400 meters of empty ruined street. She was 20 years old, and she had nothing in her hands. She looked at Izumi on the glass for a second, and her whole face folded, and she put it back and looked up. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice went out on the backup mic. "I know it changes nothing." She was shaking so hard it was visible from the parking structure roof, and she stood there anyway. I was 15, and I was scared, and none of that is a reason, and I said 7 words to you under an awning in the rain, and I have been paying for them every day for 5 years, and I still haven't gotten anywhere near the end of it. Her hands were open at her sides. I went to the bridge every year. I bought a candle every year, and I never lit it, because lighting it felt like I was allowed, and I wasn't allowed. I sat in a hospital corridor in Osaka for 11 days and got photographed doing it, and everybody thought I was there for him, and I wasn't. I was there because sitting in a corridor was the only thing left that hurt enough to be honest. She swallowed. "I don't want anything," Ochako Uraraka said. "I'm not asking you to stop, and I'm not asking you to spare anybody, and I'm not asking for one single thing. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you're standing in front of me, and I've had 5 years of things I would have said." Her chin came up. "So, I'm sorry. I know it changes nothing, but I'm saying it anyway." Izuku Midoriya looked at her. 9,000 people watched his face while he did it, and there was nothing on it. Not hatred, not vindication. Nothing that suggested the 5 years between the awning and the crater had contained a single hour of thought about her. "It changes nothing," he said. He extended his palm. The pulse went out of him. A single silent expansion of pressure. No fire, no sound worth the name. And it took Ochako Uraraka off her feet and drove her 11 meters backward into the base of the ruined southern wall of the Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters. And the concrete took the shape of her, and she came off it and down onto the glass in a way that told everybody watching, immediately, without any need for explanation, that she was not going to get back up. She did not. She had been 20 years old. She had wanted to buy her parents a house. Izuku Midoriya lowered his hand and walked. He came up out of the crater on the western side and out onto what was left of Uchibori Dori, and behind him a bowl of glass held 2 bodies, and in front of him 400 meters of ruined street held 1 man standing in the middle of it. Shouta Aizawa had gotten up. He had gotten up somewhere around the point where the green pillar went into the sky, with a broken knee and a kidney full of blood, and one arm that would not come above his shoulder, and he had walked 11 blocks on that knee to get here. And it had taken him 19 minutes, and he had done it without making a sound. His capture weapon had been snapped in 2 places by 4 soldiers in the road on Sakurada Dori. He had gathered what was left of it, maybe 3 meters, in 2 lengths, and wound it around his right fist, and he stood in the middle of the road with his weight on his good leg and his ruined hand wrapped in cloth and rain running off his chin. He planted himself. "Last warning," Aizawa said. Izuku Midoriya walked toward him. 1 step, 2. The 11,000 people in the ring of streets did not move and did not breathe. The national feed was up. 41 million households watched a broken teacher stand in a road with 3 meters of cloth around his fist. 3 steps. 4. Shouta Aizawa did not move. Izuku Midoriya stopped 2 feet in front of him. He looked at this man for a long moment, and it was the longest he had looked at anybody all night. And it went out on the national feed at high resolution, and people have parsed it frame by frame. He was looking at the one adult in that building who had never been part of it. Aizawa had not taught at Aldera. He had never signed an incident form with "boys will be boys" at the bottom of it. He had never sat across a desk from a 15-year-old with a burned notebook and explained that the boy with the flashy quirk was going to be somebody. He had never taken a commission stipend for a narrative he did not read, never once been in a room where the words reputational containment were spoken, never appeared anywhere in 11 years of files Nagant had pulled out of a sealed archive, except as a name attached to expulsion decisions and a single memo dated 4 years ago, in which Shota Aizawa of UA High School had objected in writing to the commission's practice of assigning press handlers to minors, and had been overruled. He had spent 30 years doing a real job, badly paid in the dark, and had told the truth to children about the odds. Izuku Midoriya put one hand on Shota Aizawa's shoulder and pushed. It was not a strike, there was no light in it. It was a hand on a shoulder with about as much force behind it as a closing door, applied to a man with one working leg, and Aizawa went down backward onto the road and stayed down. He was breathing. He was conscious. He had both hands on the asphalt and he was trying to work out what had just happened to him. Izuku Midoriya stepped over him and kept walking. That was the moment. Every account agrees. The distinction between the 2 people at the bottom of the crater and the man breathing in the road was the most deliberate act of the entire night, and it was made without a single word. And 11,000 people in the surrounding streets and 41 million households understood it perfectly and immediately. They understood it because they had watched him make the same kind of decision 6 times since 3 o'clock in the afternoon 4 months ago. 28,000 people asleep in a stadium and 9 hospitalized from the exits, 0 dead. 14 men in a hallway in Naruhata, and 5 of them allowed to run. 11 Yakuza branches emptied of money and kneecaps and left breathing to explain it to each other. A little girl in a basement and a man on a floor with no arms and no death. There was a system in it. There had always been a system in it. That morning, on a road in Chiyoda, the whole country learned to read it. Behind him, students and heroes and 11 exhausted sidekicks stood in the wreckage of a national capital and did not form a line because there was nothing left to form one behind. They came apart in 1s and 2s over the following 40 minutes. Some of them went to the crater and did what people do. 2 students from Class 1A sat down on the curb and could not stand up. Kamui Woods walked 11 blocks north and sat in a stairwell until 9 in the morning. Hawk stood on the plaza edge with his hands in his pockets and looked at the bowl of glass and said, to nobody, yeah, and then went to find a phone that worked because there were 3 governments that needed to be told what they had just watched, and he was, somehow, still the only person in Japan with the numbers. Endeavor was carried off Sakurada Dori by 4 heroes on a shutter door. He was conscious the whole way. He did not speak. He would walk with a cane for the remaining 39 years of his life and would spend 11 of them running a free hand-to-hand school in Fukuoka for anybody who walked in, and he would never once in those 39 years say the word fire. Shota Aizawa lay in the road until 6:20 in the morning and then got himself upright against a lamppost and limped 11 kilometers back to the ruins of UA High School to find out how many of his students were alive. 19 of 20. He sat down in the courtyard where a girl had stood up in the rain and put his face in his hands. He would teach for another 31 years. He would never carry a capture weapon again, and he would become, over the following decade, the single most sought-after instructor in the country, and he would open every first lesson the same way for 31 years, which was by walking into the hall and saying, "Nobody is coming to save you. Now, feet." Dawn came over Tokyo at 6:44. It came up gray and then pale and then, briefly, absurdly, a clean pink over the bay, because weather does not know what has happened. The red was out of the sky by 7. The last of the compound went inert in the water table around 8. At 7:30 in the morning, Kaina Tsutsumi walked up the steps of the National Diet Building with a rifle on her shoulder and stood in front of 11 cameras and one working national uplink. She had not slept in 39 hours. She was in a coat with rain on it. Her right arm was ordinary flesh from the shoulder down and had been since 12/11, and she had kept the rifle because she liked it better this way. A rifle was a rifle, and it meant she had to think about the shot. Behind her, on the steps, stood Rikuto Ozaki, 6'4" and lizard-headed, holding a crowbar he had never used, and Sen Ashizu, 19 hours out of theater 2 with blood still on his shoes, and Mika Toyota with her shoulder strapped, and 11 other people the old world had never counted. Nagant looked at the camera. She did not perform. Everybody who has ever studied the recording says the same thing about it, that it is the least theatrical piece of oratory in the modern history of the country, and that is why it worked. The Hero Public Safety Commission is disbanded as of this hour. Hero licensing is abolished and will not be reinstated. There is no ranking system in this country anymore, and there is not going to be another one. The hierarchy that was built on what came out of your blood at 4 years old is finished, and it is not coming back because the thing it was built on does not exist. Nobody in Japan is stronger than you by birth this morning. Nobody ever will be again. What you have from today is a body and a will and the time between now and when you die, and that is what everybody else has too. The doors of the deep are open in 11 cities to anyone willing to get up at 4 in the morning and find out what they are made of. A council of people this system did not count will govern until there is something better. And if you have a claim, a grievance, a dead relative, or something you want to build, come to the Diet Building and say so out loud, and you will be heard by someone who has been where you are. 9,000 people watched what happened on that plaza, and 40 million more watched it at home. And I'm not going to insult you by pretending it was anything other than what it was. The age of inheritance is over. She lowered the microphone. 12 sentences. 11 seconds of silence afterward on the feed because the director in Studio 9 did not know what to cut to. In a hospital break room in Nagoya, a healing-type nurse named Sayaka Morita sat on the floor with her back against a locker and watched those 12 sentences on a phone propped against a chair leg. She had lost a man under her hands at 12:31, 90 seconds of a car crash victim's life running out through her palms, while she said, "Wait, wait," and she had not moved from the 4th floor since. She had sat down on the break room floor at 4 in the morning and had not gotten up. When the address ended, she stayed exactly where she was, and she said, out loud, to an empty room, "I don't know how to do anything." Then she got up because someone was shouting in the corridor, and she went out and held a compress on a scalp laceration for 19 minutes with 2 hands and a bandage, and it worked. And she cried the entire time, and she did not stop being a nurse for another 34 years. In Osaka, in a small apartment above a laundry, a retired ranked hero named Gunhead watched the address on a 9-inch television with one hand over his mouth. He had been a combat instructor. He had spent 11 years telling teenagers that hand-to-hand is what you have when everything else is gone, and had been laughed at by 3 generations of students for it, and had retired in a country where nobody wanted a class in the fundamentals. He watched 12 sentences on a small screen with his hand over his mouth. And then he took his hand away and said, "Oh," in the tone of a man who has just found out that he had been right about the one thing he was right about. His waiting list by the following Wednesday was 1,100 names long. In Asahikawa in Hokkaido, in a 2-room flat with the heating turned down, 3 18-year-olds who had been born corn-spannet. Quirkless watched the address on a laptop. Their names were Kenta and Yui and Sho. They had gone to school together. They had spent 11 years being the 3 at the back, and had every single one of them walked through a professional doorway, a job interview, a bank counter, a doctor's office, in the specific hunched apologetic way that quirkless kids in that country learned before they could read. The address ended. None of them said anything for a while. Yui said, "What does that mean?" Kenta said, "I don't know." Sho said, "It means we can go." And that was the whole conversation, because none of the 3 of them had a single word available for what was happening in their chests. It was too big, and it did not have a shape yet. They sat in a cold flat in Hokkaido at 8 in the morning and looked at a laptop and felt something enormous and had no name for it. And 11 weeks later, all 3 of them were in a training hall in Sapporo, standing in a row in the dark at 4 in the morning. And 30 years later, one of them ran it. In the deep, at 7:31 in the morning, Eri sat on her crate in the training hall and watched the address on the big screen they had bolted to the wall. She was 7. She had turned 7 11 weeks ago, and they had made her a cake with strawberries on it, and Rikuto Ozaki had built her a bookshelf with 1 broken shelf. She had white hair to her waist and a horn on the right side of her head, and she was wearing a coat that was much too big for her because it had been given to her in a basement by a woman who kept very few promises. She watched the whole thing without moving. Her feet swung. She understood some of it. She understood that the woman on the screen was Nagant, and that Nagant was talking to everybody in the country at once, which seemed like a lot of people to talk to. She understood the word finished. She understood that something had ended and that it was the thing the grown-ups had been getting ready for. And she understood that she had been part of getting ready for it because they had taken her blood with a needle and a cartoon and a sticker and had asked her first every single time and had stopped the one time she said, "Stop." When it ended, she turned around on the crate. There was a woman standing behind her. A deep medic named Haruna, 31, 4 months at the diet, up all night, and Eri looked at her very seriously. "Is it over?" she said. Haruna knelt down. "No," she said, "but the first part is." Eri thought about that for a while. Then she nodded, once, because that was a real answer, and she had spent her whole life being able to tell the difference. Izuku Midoriya spent the first hour of the morning on a rooftop in Marunouchi and did not speak to anyone. It was an office building, 9 floors. He had gone up to it because it faced east and because there was nothing on the roof but an air handler and a rusted railing. The red was out of the sky. The sun came up over the bay and went across the harbor and up the faces of 1,000 buildings with no glass in them, and the light came through the empty frames and out the other sides. And the whole eastern quarter of Tokyo glittered because there was 41,000 panes of glass on the ground. He stood at the rail with the aura at its lowest burn. A red edge on him and nothing more, enough that the rail under his hands was warm and the puddle at his feet was gone. And he looked at it. The world he had been erased from was finished. It had taken him 5 years and 11 hours. What came next was a question with no answer in it yet, and it would take years, and some of those years would be bad. There would be a foreign response. There would be men in rooms in 11 countries doing exactly what men in rooms do. There would be somebody in this city inside a decade who decided that a world without inheritance was a world where he should be the one on top of it, and he would have to be taken apart, and there would be other after him. There would be children born next spring who would grow up as the first generation in 180 years to be looked at by a doctor who had nothing to tell them about their own lives. He was not afraid of years. He had spent 8 months in a cave in the Tsukuba Highlands, sitting in snow until sitting in snow stopped being a hardship. Years were nothing. Years were the only material he had ever had. At around 9, Nagant found him. She came up through the access hatch with 2 cups of coffee that she had made in the ruins of a commission break room, which meant they were terrible. And she handed him one and leaned on the rail beside him and did not say anything for about 4 minutes. The sea was out there, gray-blue and very wide, past the cranes and the container stacks and the flat glass water of a harbor that had gone still at 5:31 and had only just started to move again. "You want the rundown," she said eventually. "Yes." "You're not going to like it." "Give it to me." She pulled a folded page out of her coat, which was a thing she did because she trusted paper and did not trust anything with a battery in it anymore. Right. UN Security Council went into emergency session at 2:40 our time, and it hasn't come out. That's 6 hours and counting. And the read I'm getting from 3 separate sources is that they've stopped talking about Japan and started talking about the compound. She flicked the page, which was inevitable. It works on the factor. The factor is the same in every human being on the planet. What Ishizu built in a subway tunnel is the first weapon in history that can permanently disarm the entire species. And every government on Earth found that out at the same time as their own citizens, which was on television at 4 a.m. from a woman on a rooftop. Yes, America's grounded civilian air traffic over the Pacific. That's not aimed at us. That's them not knowing what else to do with their hands. The EU's got an emergency framework session Monday. India's said nothing at all, which from India means a great deal. She turned the page. 3 of them have quirk-enhanced military assets that came through the night intact because the rain fell on this archipelago and nowhere else. America has about 900 enhanced personnel across 4 programs. Russia's number is not knowable and is probably a lie in either direction. China has a program they have never once acknowledged, and my best estimate on it is 11,000 people, and I want to be very clear that the 11,000 is a guess with a lot of air in it. Izuku drank the terrible coffee. "And they will come," he said. "Some of them will come. Not this month. Not with soldiers, first. First, it'll be sanctions and shipping and a lot of extremely angry men at podiums, and then there'll be a proposal about international inspection of Ashizu's facility, and then somebody's special forces will try to take the facility, and that's the one to watch, and it'll happen inside 18 months. She folded the page. There are also 4 Japanese nationals with foreign passports who got out on Thursday with enough of the technical picture in their heads to be a problem. I know where 3 of them are. And the 4th? Working on it. He nodded once. It's not over, Nagant said. None of it's over. It won't be over for years. You know that, right? You didn't finish anything last night. You opened something. I know. Good. She drank her own coffee and made a face at it. Because the number of people I've met who could do what you did last night and then understand that sentence is 1, and I've been checking. They stood there. Down in the street below, 11 floors down, a man was sweeping glass off a pavement with a broom, which was not going to accomplish anything. And he was doing it anyway, and there were 2 other people helping him. Can I ask you something? Nagant said. Yes. What do you want? He looked over at her. No, properly. She turned to face him and put her back against the rail. You've done it. That's what I'm getting at. Every single thing you set out to do between a bridge and this morning, you have done, and the list is not short. You broke the underworld. You broke the commission. You put the lie about yourself on 40 million screens. You killed the strongest man who ever lived, and then the second one, and then everybody who came to stand in front of you. And last night at 10 past 12, you took 180 years of somebody else's inheritance out of 126 million people, which, as far as I can work out, has never been done in human history by anyone. She let that sit. So, after all of this, what do you actually want? Izuku Midoriya was quiet for long enough that she looked over at him. The sun was fully up. The sea was very wide. Somewhere south of them, a ship was sounding its horn. Once, twice, because the harbor was moving again, and a ship's captain had decided that whatever had happened last night, the schedule was the schedule. Power given is power borrowed, he said. Power built is power owned. He kept looking at the water. I want a world where every person understands the difference. Nagant sat with that for a while. She had spent 11 years in the service of an institution that had looked at a 17-year-old girl who could grow bullets out of her own arm and seen a line in a budget. She had put 58 people in the ground for it, and 22 of those had done nothing but read the wrong filing cabinet. And she had stopped asking somewhere around year 10 because that is a thing that happens to a person. And then a boy on a water tower had said the true thing out loud in front of her and had not wanted anything. She turned the sentence over. "That's going to take a while," she said. "Yes. Like generations. That's not a 5-year plan, Midoriya. Every kid born in this country from next spring is going to grow up in a world where nothing gets handed to them. And they're going to be the first ones who actually get it. And by the time they're running things, you and I will be old." She rubbed her eye with the back of her wrist. "You're describing something you don't get to see finished." "Yes," Izuku said, "and you're fine with that." "I am the wrong person to build a thing for myself," he said. "I would not know what to put in it." Nagant laughed, once unwillingly. Then she leaned over against him, shoulder to ribs, and put her weight there, which she could do now without her hair singeing, and had been able to do for 11 months. He put his arm around her. There was no ceremony in it, and neither of them said anything about it. Two people who had been made out of hard material by people who owed them apologies, who had each spent their whole lives assuming that anything warm was a trap with better bait, standing on a rooftop in Marunouchi with terrible coffee, and the sea in the distance, and a city below them beginning its first day as something with no name yet. The access hatch banged. They both turned. Eri was standing on it. She had climbed something she had very much not been supposed to climb. 9 floors of internal fire stair with a door at the top that Nagant had personally checked was locked, which raised a question that nobody in the deep ever satisfactorily answered. And she had one hand on the door frame, and the coat that was much too big for her was hanging off one shoulder. She looked extremely serious. "I have a new joke," Eri said. Nagant put a hand over her eyes. "Tell it," Izuku said. Eri drew herself up. "Why did the man put his shoes in the fridge?" Nobody answered. "Because," Eri said, "he wanted cold feet, but the cold feet was in the fridge, and now he can't go to the wedding because his shoes are cold." There was a pause of about 2 seconds. "That's not how," Nagant started and stopped because Eri was looking at her, and because the child had clearly worked on it. Izuku Midoriya made the sound. It was low and it was short and it lasted less than a second, and it was the sound of a door moving on a good hinge, and it was, by the internal reckoning of the deep, about 4% of a laugh, and every person in that organization would have crossed a burning building to hear it. Eri's face lit up like a switch had been thrown. "I made it myself," she said. "I know." Nagant covered her face with one hand and did not say anything at all. And behind the hand, she was crying a bit, and she was going to deny that later and be believed by nobody. 6 months on, the country did not look like a country that had been through what it had been through. It looked worse in some ways and better in others, and mostly it looked busy. There was no hero industry. 240,000 people had worked in it directly, and 11 times that number indirectly, and all of it stopped inside a week. And the collapse of it took 4 industries down and left an enormous hole in the middle of the economy. There were shortages. There were 11 weeks in the spring where the trains ran at half capacity because the maintenance contracts had been in around quirk-assisted labor, and nobody had done the work with tools since 2011. Crime went up for 9 weeks, and then went down and kept going down, yet because the criminal side of the ledger had lost exactly as much as everybody else, and had lost it with no organization behind it and no money. Since a man in a black coat had spent 5 years taking all the money, the healing wards came out of 41 hospitals and went back to being operating theaters. Sen Ashizu did not sleep properly for a year. He wrote a textbook. It was 1,100 pages long, and it was in every medical school in the country inside 18 months. And he dedicated it to a scrub nurse named Yoshi Tanabe and a 7-year-old girl whose name he did not print. The training halls opened, and this was the part nobody had predicted, including Izuku. There were 9 in the first month. There were 400 by autumn. They opened in gymnasiums and warehouses and had a decommissioned bowling alley in Sendai and the entire ground floor of a shuttered hero agency in Nagoya. And they opened because the demand was enormous and unstoppable and had been sitting under the surface of that country for 180 years. 20% of the population had been quirkless, 25 million people. Every single one of them had spent their entire lives in a world where the answer to what you had been given at 4 years old with 2 fingers on an x-ray. And every one of them woke up on a Friday in a world where the question was open. And it turned out, this is the part in the histories, that they were not the only ones who wanted in. The ones who came in the largest numbers, in the end, were the ones with the small quirks. The eyebrow color changers. The people who could make a sound like a doorbell. The 40 million people who had been handed something at 4 years old that was just enough to keep them inside the system and never enough to matter in it, and who had spent their whole lives in the exact middle of a ladder they could not climb. They filled the halls, 4 in the morning, in the dark, in rows. Most of them never learned to put light on their hands. That was fine. That had always been fine. 1 in 15 learned to push. 1 in 50 learned to fly. And by the end of the second year, there were 400 people in Japan who could fly. And by the end of the 5th, there were 9,000, and none of them had been born with it. And every single one of them knew exactly what it had cost. The international community stayed in session. That is not a joke. And it is not a dismissal. It stayed in session for 4 years. There were sanctions, and there was a shipping blockade for 11 months, and there was, in the spring of the second year, an attempt by 9 foreign operators to take the Ashizu facility in Yokohama, which failed at the perimeter against 12 people in gray who had been getting up at 4 in the morning for 6 years and who took all 9 of them alive, which was the specific instruction and which had been the specific instruction every time for 6 years. Nobody bombed the archipelago. There was a period of about 3 weeks in the second year when it was discussed in one capital in a room, and the discussion ended when somebody at the end of the table played 4 seconds of a video from Kamino Ward and said, "And then he comes to us." So the arguing is what the international community does, and it argued for years, and the years took care of themselves. By the 11th year, 2 other countries had chosen the reign by vote after 9 years of public argument, and the argument in those countries was the loudest argument either of them had ever had about anything. And they had it, and it was theirs. Izuku Midoriya never governed, he was asked. The council that formed on the steps of the Diet building asked him twice in the first month, formally in front of witnesses, and both times he said no, and the second time he explained why in 9 words, and the explanation went into the constitutional preamble 4 years later. He trained people. That was all he ever did afterward. He was in a hall at 4 in the morning, 6 days a week for the next 51 years, correcting stances, remembering names, sitting on the floor for 2 hours with somebody who could not stop crying and saying maybe 11 words the entire time. He and Kaina Tsutsumi were together for all of it. They never married and never explained why. They raised Eri, who grew up in the deep and then in a house in Yokohama with a real window, and who became, in a turn nobody in that family ever fully got over, a pediatric surgeon, and who used to say in interviews when she was asked about her childhood that she had been raised by 2 people who were extremely bad at being asked how they were, and that she had spent her whole life asking them anyway. She told terrible jokes until she was 81. On a morning in the first spring before all of that, Izuku Midoriya stood on a roof above Yokohama in the early light with the aura at its lowest burn and looked east. The sea was out there. It was going to be a hot day. Down in the streets, the city was doing the thing cities do, which is continue. And out past the container cranes, the water was moving properly again. And somewhere below him, 900 people were finishing in a hall and going to breakfast. There was a lot ahead. Foreign fleets and long arguments and men in rooms and eventually other people who would decide that a world with no ceiling meant they should be standing on top of it. 20 years of it, at least. Probably 50. He was not afraid of years. The wind came off the water and went around him, and the light came up over the bay and turned everything the color of a new thing that has not been named yet. The world asked what I was without a quirk, he said, the sea below, the morning sky. Now it knows.
The hero roster. A massive salute to the legends backing this journey. Your support is what keeps the momentum at an all-time high and the dream moving forward. You guys are the absolute best. Pro heroes. The elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. DA, Fire 05. Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community, the titans who keep our foundations solid and the hype at an all-time high. Alexander Igarza, That Guy Miso, Deck, Lydell Scott Jr., James Martin, Victor Laroux, Rune Brokstad, Ariuse Bryant, Jonah Wheeler, T-Mac, XXHJRX3A7XX, Hyperbeams, Michael Murphy, Grand Region Kell, Sin Hunter, Logan Bland, Alexander Johannes, Alex Morgan, Ray Various, That Other Guy Too, Chad Reynolds, T. Mackie 68 Rimuru, A. Zetros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, Jacob Ropes, Bully Maguire Shadow, Rathakit Thitiratnan Thakul, Neostar Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Thunder, Sunawin 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Remorsefuls, Black Vein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK8ER, Corey Tokars, Jan, Devin Black, Crow, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alastor, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie 60, Ignacio. Hope of the universe, the ultimate guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Void Rot, Chaos Umbre, Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Tyshawn Palmer, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, I Shoot X50, Greg Green, James, Q Hon Yen Thompson, Juan, and Zeno KJ. Thanks for watching the full story. If this hit hard, drop a like, smash that subscribe button, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. More wild what-ifs and full movies coming soon. Tell me in the comments which character you want next. Appreciate every single one of you.